Imagine if I shared with you that among the Bible's most enigmatic prophets, there was one who experienced a vision of such overwhelming terror and supernatural strangeness that academics continue debating what it means even now. Ezekiel did more than simply listen to the voice of God. He bore witness to spinning wheels blanketed with countless eyes, beings bearing 4 different faces, and an entire valley of dried bones that were brought back into living flesh. Yet here's the part that rarely gets mentioned. Within these reality-bending visions exists one of Scripture's most powerful and sorrowful narratives about exile and divine judgment, and about hope that endures against impossible odds. We're going to explore the full account of Ezekiel, starting from his divine appointment as a prophet living among those held captive in Babylon, all the way through to his concluding prophecies concerning a temple of restoration that remains unbuilt to this very day. But before we get started, if this channel is new to you, think about tapping that like button and hitting subscribe if content like this brings you some peace. Also, drop a comment telling us your location and what time you're watching. We really would enjoy hearing from you. So, with no more delay, shall we dive in? Above the waters of the Kebar River, the heavens split apart, not with the gentleness of morning fog rising from a stream. This tearing open is aggressive, uncontrolled. A massive storm cloud charges toward the young Ezekiel, driven by the intensity of heavenly intention. From within the churning winds, 4 creatures appear. Each one carries 4 distinct faces. The face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of an ox, the face of an eagle. Their wings stretch out wide, the tips making contact with one another. Below these beings, wheels nested within, wheels rotate in directions that defy natural laws. Along their outer edges, eyes burn. Innumerable eyes that observe, that comprehend, that see beyond skin and muscle, straight into the core of human existence. Between these creatures, fire flashes and dances. Bolts of lightning tear through the atmosphere. The noise builds louder than any thunderclap, more profound than the rumbling of earthquakes. This phenomenon has nothing to do with earthly storms. This is the tempest of the divine realm, breaking through into the world of mortal beings. Rising above these creatures spread something resembling crystal, like an ocean frozen in place, translucent, stunning beyond any earthly comparison, yet terrifying beyond human language. Resting upon this platform of crystal sits a throne constructed of sapphire stone. The blue is flawless, untainted, like the very center of the ocean's deepest point. Upon that throne rests a figure shaped like a human being, yet glowing with fire, the color of amber from the waist upward. From the waist down, flames twist and spiral. The brilliance that encircles this being resembles a rainbow appearing after rainfall. Soft colors present within a scene of crushing power. Ezekiel recognizes instantly that this is the glory of the Lord himself, not merely a symbolic vision of God, but God choosing in this moment to make his presence known. The enormity of this reality comes crashing down upon the young priest's shoulders. His knees give way beneath him, his strength drains completely, his face falls forward into the dirt along the riverbank. The voice arrives like the sound of water rushing over rocks, bottomless, never-ending. It calls out his name, Son of Man. These words possess significance far beyond their surface simplicity. Here exists a being made of dust, standing before the one who is eternal. Mortal clay confronting the divine. Terror seizes every fiber of his being. This is not the mild and comforting God spoken of in children's evening prayers. This is the Lord of hosts, the one who crafted the stars, the master of every storm. Power that exceeds human comprehension has chosen to communicate. Ezekiel's existence will be forever altered. This vision brands itself permanently into his consciousness. Each particular detail, each shade of color, each sound, the spinning wheels will revisit him in his dreams. Those multiple faces will return during moments of stillness. That sapphire throne will shine behind his shut eyelids for every remaining day of his life. But in this present moment, There exists only wonder, only dread, only the overwhelming pressure of divine presence bearing down upon a young man who believed he had understood God. The river continues its normal flow beside him, calm, undisturbed, while everything else has been transformed beyond recognition. The context of catastrophe. The great city of Jerusalem stands balanced on a razor's edge. This city that once experienced the splendor of Solomon's reign now trembles before Babylon's ascending dominance. The armies of King Nebuchadnezzar cast shadows that stretch long across the entire land. The golden era is drawing to a close, and almost no one perceives what's approaching. Within the temple courtyards, political scheming contaminates what should be sacred space. Priests conspire alongside princes. Prophets who speak falsehoods promise comfortable peace. The Lord will never forsake his sacred city, they declare. Jerusalem cannot be conquered, they insist. Their promises sound appealing, but leave behind the harsh aftertaste of deception. King Jehoiachin occupies David's ancient throne. He is young and lacks wisdom. His father's uprising against Babylon left the kingdom in a weakened state. Now, the enemy draws near like an approaching flood. The protective walls that sheltered countless generations of rulers cannot possibly hold back this tide of imperial force. Ezekiel moves through these turbulent times as someone being trained for priestly service. Born into the family line of Buzi, his entire life should have been spent serving within the temple. The holy place was meant to encompass his entire world. Sacred hymns, sacrifices offered at sunrise, prayers recited at sunset, a life defined by pattern and ceremony. Instead, he observes as corruption seeps into every corner of the holy city. Merchants conduct business within the temple courts. Judges accept payments for favorable rulings. Those living in poverty go without food, while the wealthy hold lavish banquets. Israel has abandoned the covenant. The law lies forgotten, while the population chases after foreign deities. This young priest perceives what others fail to notice. This situation transcends mere political crisis. This represents spiritual disintegration. The nation that was meant to shine as a light illuminating the world has instead become darkness itself. The temple structure still remains standing, but God's presence seems remote. Prayers create echoes in chambers that feel empty. Reports arrive from the northern regions. Babylon's military forces advance like swarms of locusts, devouring everything lying in their path. One city after another crumbles. People fleeing the destruction pour into Jerusalem, carrying accounts of terrible suffering. Children ripped away from their parents, homes reduced to ashes, entire lives obliterated. Yet the leaders continue to refuse what they see. God makes his dwelling in Zion, they announce. His holy mountain is beyond defeat. They place their confidence in physical stones and constructed walls rather than in righteousness. They have faith in their own strength rather than in divine compassion. Ezekiel senses the building pressure. Something is on its way, something both dreadful and necessary. The God of Israel will not tolerate mockery indefinitely. Justice that has been postponed is not justice that has been cancelled. The day when accounts must be settled approaches like thunderclouds massing on the distant horizon. The city holds its collective breath. Merchants continue selling their merchandise. Children continue their games in the streets. But beneath these ordinary rhythms of daily existence, anxiety grows. Transformation is inevitable, whether they welcome it or resist it. For young Ezekiel, these mark the final days of his previous life. Soon he will discover that God's intentions extend far beyond these temple walls. His divine assignment lies not in the familiar comforts of Jerusalem, but in foreign, difficult places where faith must be reborn from nothing, forced into exile. The siege arrives with speed and savagery. Nebuchadnezzar's military forces encircle Jerusalem like fingers closing into a fist. The impressive walls that stood for generations become a cage. Food supplies diminish. Hope disappears even faster. King Jehoiachin understands far too late that resistance offers no possibility of success. Babylon's might cannot be overcome through courageous declarations or frantic prayers. Surrender arrives with severe conditions. The king himself must depart into exile. 10,000 of the nation's finest and most capable must accompany him. Ezekiel stands among those selected, chosen not for any honor, but for removal. Babylon desires the skilled laborers, the educated priests, the individuals who might become leaders. Better to have them serving in distant lands than organizing rebellion at home. The future of Israel walks in chains toward foreign territory. The march commences on a morning heavy with mourning. Families are torn into pieces. Children weep for parents they may never encounter again. The elderly are left behind, too frail for the journey ahead. Jerusalem empties itself of its heart while the physical body remains. Dust clouds rise from thousands upon thousands of feet, traveling the long road toward Babylon. Each step carries them further from everything familiar. The temple diminishes to a distant memory. The recognizable hills of Judah dissolve into the past. The God who resided in Zion appears very distant now. Days blend together into weeks. The sun beats down without mercy. Water becomes scarce and valuable. The weak collapse along the roadside. Guards demonstrate no compassion for those unable to maintain the pace. This is not travel, but trauma enacted. Not a journey, but judgment made physical. Ezekiel's feet develop bleeding wounds inside his sandals. His priestly garments transform into tatters. The hands that should have lifted up holy offerings now bear the burden of exile. Everything he prepared for lies behind him. Everything he anticipated turns to dust. Babylon emerges on the horizon like something from a fever dream. Enormous walls make anything in Jerusalem appear small. Towers stretch upward toward the heavens in prideful challenge. The city sprawls without end, housing gods that Israel was instructed to reject. This is the stomach of the beast. The exiled population is settled along the Kebar River, not the worst location they might have ended up, yet far from home regardless. The water flows with steady indifference to their weeping. Foreign earth beneath their feet, foreign languages in their ears, foreign meals in their mouths. Here they must discover new methods of living, new customs to observe, new masters to obey. The young men who might have become priests in Jerusalem instead become servants in Babylon. The craftsmen with skills construct magnificence for foreign rulers. Their abilities serve alien deities. Ezekiel discovers himself among the Tel Aviv settlement. Fellow exiles share his bewilderment and sorrow. They mention home in hushed voices. They question whether God has forgotten their existence. They ask why those who are righteous must suffer while the wicked enjoy prosperity. Some adjust rapidly. They master the language, welcome the culture, make their peace with their changed reality. Others retreat into resentful memories. They cultivate their hatred and fantasize about return. Both reactions feel like abandoning something sacred. This young priest wrestles with questions that have no simple answers. Where does God exist in this place? Can the Holy One receive worship on foreign ground? Have the promises made to Israel become worthless? Has the covenant shattered permanently? Along the river, he sits during the evening hours and observes the water flowing. It moves without ceasing, but travels nowhere he can perceive. Like his existence now, like his people, like his faith, everything flows, yet the final destination stays hidden, the summons of flame. The vision returns with intensity greater than before. Not gently this time, but like lightning splitting open the sky. The storm cloud races across the heavens above the Kebar River. The four living creatures emerge once more from the whirlwind. Their faces blaze with fire that is divine. Man, lion, ox, eagle, each one perfect in both its terror and its beauty. Wings beat, creating the sound of rushing waters. The wheels within wheels spin with greater speed now, their edges still burning with countless eyes. Nothing can escape their observation. The expanse of crystal stretches above them, clearer than the morning atmosphere. Upon it rests the throne of sapphire, blue as the deepest section of the ocean. The figure upon the throne burns with light, the color of amber above the waist, flames dancing below. The glory of the rainbow surrounds him like a crown constructed of colors. Yet this time the vision does not conclude, with Ezekiel's face pressed into the dirt. The voice speaks with the authority of creation itself. "Son of man, stand on your feet." The words possess power beyond their literal meaning. They lift him up from the ground. The Spirit enters him, not gently, but like wind filling a sail completely. Suddenly, he can stand before the throne without collapsing in weakness. The fear remains present, but so does newfound strength. Divine power flows through mortal flesh. "I am sending you to the Israelites," the voice announces, "to a rebellious nation that has turned against me." The words sting precisely because they ring with truth. God's chosen people have chosen other gods. Instead, the covenant lies broken like shattered pottery. The divine chariot, for that is exactly what this is, represents God's ability to move. The Lord is not confined within the temple back in Jerusalem. He can travel wherever he desires. Even here beside the waters of Babylon, his presence can be experienced. Ezekiel receives his commission not as a reward, but as a weight to carry. He will speak to people who refuse to hear. He will issue warnings to those who embrace their sin. He will call out in the wilderness of exile, while his listeners cover their ears. The vision reveals something both terrible and wonderful. Terrible because it demonstrates God's willingness to depart from his holy city when his people abandon him. Wonderful because it proves he has not abandoned them completely. Even in exile, he approaches them. The wheels within wheels suggest divine knowledge that observes all directions simultaneously. Past, present, future merge in the sight of the eternal. What appears as catastrophe to human observation fits perfectly into divine intention. Exile is not the conclusion, but a new beginning. The four faces represent the completeness of creation. Human wisdom, lion courage, ox strength, eagle vision. All of nature serves the one who sits upon the throne. Even in foreign lands, he remains the God of everything. Ezekiel comprehends his calling now. He is to serve as a watchman for the house of Israel. Not a comfortable priest conducting routine sacrifices, but a prophet bearing difficult truths. His words will cut like a blade through the comfortable deceptions people tell themselves. The chariot throne can travel anywhere because God rules everywhere. Babylon's gods are nothing. Their power is mere illusion. The Lord of hosts remains sovereign over all nations, even when his people endure suffering in exile. As the vision diminishes, Ezekiel knows his life has changed permanently. He is no longer simply a displaced priest mourning his lost temple service. He is now the voice of God to a stubborn generation. The burden is heavy, yet the calling is certain. Signs and symbols. God's instructions arrive with startling clarity. Ezekiel must transform into a living parable. His very body becomes a message to the exiles. No longer will he speak only through words. Now his actions will proclaim truths that ears refuse to absorb. Take a clay brick, the Lord commands. Draw Jerusalem upon it. Construct siege works around it. Establish camps and battering rams. With careful hands, the prophet creates a miniature city under attack. Every detail holds importance. Every small structure speaks of approaching doom. The model sits before him, resembling a child's toy. Yet this game carries deadly seriousness. What the prophet enacts in clay will soon unfold in stone and blood. The siege of Jerusalem is not a possibility, but a certainty. Next arrives the iron griddle placed between Ezekiel and his clay city. This will be an iron wall, God explains. The barrier represents divine judgment, standing firm between the Lord and his rebellious people. No prayer will penetrate, no plea will soften it. Then the real strangeness commences. Ezekiel must lie on his left side, day after day, bearing the sin of Israel, 390 days in this position. Over a year of lying still, facing his clay Jerusalem, carrying invisible weight. The onlookers gather daily to observe this bizarre performance. Fellow exiles whisper among themselves. Has grief driven him mad, they wonder? What kind of prophet acts like this? Their confusion is part of the message. Truth often appears as madness to those who embrace lies. After the left side, 40 days, on the right, for Judah's sin, the prophet's body becomes a calendar of guilt. Each day of his discomfort represents a year of the nation's unfaithfulness. Time compressed into flesh and bone. Food arrives measured and rationed, 20 shekels of bread per day, water carefully portioned. This is how they will eat their food in Jerusalem during the siege, God explains. Hunger will be their constant companion. Thirst will gnaw at their bones. The people observe with growing horror as their prophet wastes away. His ribs show through his skin. His eyes sink into his skull. This is their future made visible. This is what rebellion costs. Some days he cooks his meager meal over burning human waste, just as God commanded. Even this disgusting detail carries meaning. In the coming siege, normal fuel will run out. People will burn anything to stay warm, to cook what little food remains. The prophet's revulsion at this command echoes Israel's future disgust at their own condition. They who considered themselves clean will be defiled by their circumstances. They who thought themselves holy will discover their true state. Children gather to stare at the strange priest who acts out stories with his body. Their parents pull them away, but not before the image burns into young minds. Memory will carry this scene long after the prophet's voice fades. "Why don't you just tell us what God wants to say?" the elders ask. But words have failed, sermons have been ignored. Sometimes truth must be felt in the gut before it reaches the mind. Sometimes the body teaches what the brain refuses to learn. Each day of the sign act builds tension in the community. What will this mad prophet do next? How long will he continue this disturbing display? The very questions keep God's message alive in conversations around evening fires. Ezekiel's sacrifice is real, his hunger genuine, his discomfort increases daily. But every pang serves a purpose, every weakness speaks of strength. In his brokenness, divine truth finds its voice. The scroll and the bitter words. A hand extends from the throne holding a scroll written on both sides. No blank spaces remain. Words cover every inch of papyrus. This is not a brief message but a complete judgment. The fullness of divine warning written in celestial ink. "Son of man, eat what is before you," the voice commands. "Eat this scroll, then go speak to the house of Israel." The instruction sounds impossible. Scrolls are for reading, not eating. But nothing about this calling follows normal patterns. Ezekiel opens his mouth like a child accepting food from a parent's hand. The scroll touches his tongue. The taste surprises him, sweet as honey, pleasant as fresh fruit. The words that spell doom for his people taste like heaven in his mouth. This paradox cuts to the heart of prophetic ministry. God's judgment, though terrible in its effects, springs from perfect love. Divine wrath is not cruel anger, but righteous response to sin. Even destruction can taste sweet when it serves redemption's purpose. The scroll dissolves on his tongue like communion bread. Its words become part of him now. No longer external message, but internal reality. He cannot speak anything but what he has consumed. His voice will echo what his soul has absorbed. Your people are not willing to listen to you, God warns, because they are not willing to listen to me. The prophet's mission is doomed to apparent failure from the start. He will speak to deaf ears and blind eyes. His words will bounce off hard hearts, like stones off armor. Yet he must speak anyway. Success is not his responsibility. Faithfulness is. The watchman's duty is to warn, not to guarantee that warnings are heeded. Blood guilt falls on those who refuse to turn from their wicked ways. God makes Ezekiel's forehead hard as flint, harder than diamond. He will need this strength to stand against the stubborn faces of his audience. They will mock him, threaten him, ignore him, but his face will remain set toward truth. The commission comes with clear boundaries. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious house, the Lord instructs. The prophet must not mirror the stubbornness of his people. He must remain soft toward God, even while becoming hard toward opposition. 7 days of silence follow the scroll-eating vision. Ezekiel sits among the exiles at Tel Aviv, overwhelmed by all he has seen and heard. The words digest in his spiritual stomach. The honey sweetness fades, leaving behind the bitter reality of judgment. During these quiet days, fellow exiles watch him carefully. Something has changed in their priest-prophet. His eyes hold new depth. His silence carries weight. Even without speaking, he radiates the presence of divine encounter. When the 7 days end, God's word comes again. I have made you a watchman for the house of Israel. The role is both privilege and curse. He will see danger before others notice it. He will cry alarm while others sleep peacefully. The watchman's burden is heavy. If he warns the wicked and they refuse to turn, they die in their sin. But if he fails to warn them, their blood is on his hands. Every conversation becomes a matter of life and death. Every word carries eternal weight. Ezekiel's tongue, once bound by shock and awe, now loosens for proclamation. But he will speak only when God opens his mouth. Silence and speech will alternate according to divine timing. He becomes an instrument played by the master musician. The sweet scroll has become bitter truth in his belly. What tasted like honey now churns like gall. This is the prophet's lot, to find joy in God's presence while grieving over God's people, to taste heaven while speaking of hell. Shaving and scattering, the razor's edge gleams in the morning light by the Kebar River. God's command echoes in Ezekiel's mind. Take a sharp sword and use it as a barber's razor to shave your head and your beard. The blade will cut away more than hair today. For a priest, this act borders on the unthinkable. The law forbids priests from shaving their heads or trimming their beards. These signs of holiness mark them as set apart for sacred service. To remove them means stepping outside the bounds of normal religious life. But normal times have passed. The temple lies far away. The priesthood serves foreign masters now. God calls for new signs that speak to new circumstances. Sometimes obedience requires breaking old rules to follow deeper truths. The prophet sits by the water's edge and begins to shave. The blade scrapes against his scalp with harsh grinding sounds. Clumps of dark hair fall into the dust at his feet. Each stroke removes another mark of his priestly identity. Fellow exiles gather to watch this latest strange performance. Whispers ripple through the crowd. "What is he doing now?" they murmur. "Has he lost all sense of propriety?" Their shock is part of the message. Sometimes, truth must scandalize before it saves. His beard follows the hair from his head. The razor moves carefully around his chin and cheeks. Years of growth disappear in minutes. The face that emerges looks younger, more vulnerable. The priest becomes a visual parable of loss and transformation. When the shaving ends, Ezekiel divides the cut hair into 3 equal portions. Precise scales weigh each part. Every strand matters in this divine demonstration. The hair of his head represents the people of Jerusalem, and their fate hangs in the balance. The first portion goes into the fire. Flames consume the hair quickly, leaving only ash and bitter smoke. This represents those who will die in the siege, burned by hunger, disease, and warfare. The fire shows no mercy, no favorites. The second portion faces the sword. Ezekiel strikes it again and again with his blade, scattering the pieces. This symbolizes those who will fall to enemy weapons. The sword that shaved his head now demonstrates the violence coming to his people. The third portion meets the wind. He throws it high into the air and watches it scatter in all directions. Some strands blow toward distant lands, others fall nearby. This is the diaspora. God's people spread across the earth like seeds on the wind, but the sign act continues with unexpected mercy. From the scattered hair, Ezekiel carefully gathers a few strands. These he binds in the corner of his robe. Even in judgment, God preserves a remnant. Hope survives even the sharpest blade. Some of these preserved strands also face the fire. Even among the saved, some will still suffer. Survival does not guarantee comfort. The remnant will be tested and refined like precious metal in the furnace. The watching crowd understands the symbolism all too well. Their city, their families, their future, all represented in the prophet's scattered hair. Some weep openly, others turn away in anger. None remain untouched by the stark visual prophecy. This is Jerusalem, Ezekiel explains, his newly bald head gleaming in the sunlight. I have set her in the center of the nations, but she has rebelled against my laws more than the nations around her. The shaving represents God's rejection of their rebellion. The hair will grow back, but the message remains permanent. What seems like permanent loss may be temporary judgment. What appears to be the end might be a new beginning. Even the sharpest razor serves the purpose of divine love. Condemning the mountains, the prophet's voice carries across the settlement by the Kebar River. His words cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. Today, his message targets not the city of Jerusalem, but the high places of Israel, those ancient sites where his people worship false gods. Son of man, set your face toward the mountains of Israel, God commands. Prophesy against them. The distant hills cannot hear his voice, but the exiles around him can. Through them, the message will travel back to the homeland like seeds on the wind. The mountains of Israel hold dark secrets. On their heights stand altars to foreign gods. Incense burns for idols carved from wood and stone. Sacred groves hide shameful rituals. The very peaks that should declare God's glory instead mock his holiness. You mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord, Ezekiel proclaims. His voice grows stronger with each phrase. The passion of divine anger flows through his human throat. These are not his words, but heaven's judgment spoken through earthly lips. High places have always tempted God's people. Something about the elevated ground appeals to human pride. Closer to the sky, they feel closer to divinity. But their worship there is empty performance, hollow ritual that honors only their own desires. Baal's altars dot the hilltops like festering wounds. Asherah poles stand like wooden sentries guarding false devotion. The Israelites bow before carved images while claiming to serve the living God. Their hearts serve two masters, which means they serve neither. The prophet's words paint pictures of coming destruction. Swords will fall upon the idol worshippers. Their bones will lie scattered around the altars they once honored. The high places will become graveyards for those who sought life in lifeless things. I will destroy your high places, declares the Lord through his prophet. Your altars will be demolished, your incense altars broken down. I will slay your people in front of your idols. The judgment fits the crime, death where they sought false life. But the destruction serves a greater purpose than simple punishment. When the idols lie shattered and their worshippers dead, something new becomes possible. Truth can grow in soil cleared of lies. Real worship can begin where false worship ends. The mountains themselves will witness this transformation. The same heights that hosted rebellion will see restoration. Where idols once stood, the knowledge of the true God will flourish. Geography remains constant, but spiritual climate changes completely. Some among the exiles remember these high places from their youth. They recall climbing the hills for festival celebrations, burning incense to gods whose names they barely remember now. The prophet's words stir memories both sweet and bitter. Others have never seen these mountain shrines, but know their influence. Fathers and grandfathers spoke of them in whispers, either condemning or defending their practices. The debate over high places has divided families for generations. Ezekiel's message offers no middle ground. There is no compromise between truth and falsehood. No merger possible between the living God and dead idols. The mountains must choose their allegiance, and so must the people who worship on them. The wind carries his words beyond the immediate audience. Somewhere in lands far from Babylon, mountains rise toward heaven. On their peaks, altars smoke with false sacrifice. But judgment is coming, and the hills will tremble when it arrives. Even in exile, God's people must face this choice. They can serve the gods of Babylon or remember the God of Israel. They can adapt to local customs or maintain their distinct calling. The mountains of Israel are far away, but the choice is present every day. Visions of idolatry. The Spirit lifts Ezekiel by a lock of his hair, carrying him through the air like a bird on the wind. Distance collapses in the space of a heartbeat. One moment he sits by the Kebar River in Babylon. The next he stands in Jerusalem's temple courts. But this is not the temple as it should be. Corruption seeps through every stone. The outer court buzzes with activity that would make the ancient priests weep. What was meant to be holy ground has become a marketplace of spiritual compromise. At the entrance to the inner court stands an idol that provokes divine jealousy. The image towers over approaching worshippers, demanding their attention before they can reach the true altar. It blocks the path to genuine worship like a spiritual roadblock. Son of man, do you see what they are doing? God asks. The question carries infinite sadness. These are his people, chosen from all nations to be his own. Yet they treat his house like a common shrine, his courts like pagan temples. The vision deepens as the Spirit guides Ezekiel through a hidden doorway. Behind the temple's public facade lies a secret chamber filled with abominations. 70 elders of Israel bow before walls covered with carved images of creeping things and detestable beasts. Each elder holds a censer burning incense to these false gods. The smoke rises thick and acrid, carrying prayers to lifeless images. These are the leaders of God's people, the men who should guide others in righteousness. Instead, they lead the nation into spiritual adultery. They say, "The Lord does not see us." The elders whisper among themselves, "The Lord has forsaken the land." Their idolatry springs from despair, masked as pragmatism. If God has abandoned them, they reason, they must find other gods to serve. But God sees everything. No secret chamber hides from his gaze. No whispered prayer escapes his hearing. The very thought that they can hide from the Almighty reveals how far they have fallen from understanding his nature. The vision continues to the north gate of the temple. There sit women weeping for Tammuz, the Babylonian god who supposedly dies and rises with the seasons. Their tears fall for a false deity, while they ignore the living God who truly controls all seasons. These women have embraced the fertility cults of their neighbors. They seek from Tammuz what only the true God can provide: life, growth, abundance. Their weeping is sincere but misdirected, like mourning for a painted portrait while ignoring the living person beside them. At the inner court, between the porch and the altar, 25 men worship the sun. They turn their backs to the temple and bow toward the east, greeting the rising sun with prayers meant for God alone. The symbolism could not be clearer. They have literally turned their backs on the Lord. These sun worshippers represent the final stage of apostasy. They perform their false worship in the most sacred space of the temple, where the high priest should offer morning sacrifice to the true God. They bow to created light instead of the creator of light. Is it a trivial matter for the house of Judah to do the detestable things they are doing here? God's voice rises with righteous anger. Must they also fill the land with violence and continually provoke me to anger? The vision reveals what political analysis misses. Jerusalem's coming destruction is not merely the result of military weakness or diplomatic failure. It springs from spiritual corruption that has rotted the nation's foundation. External enemies can only destroy what internal rebellion has already weakened. Each level of the vision peels back another layer of deception. Surface respectability hides deeper compromise. Public worship masks private idolatry. The very place meant to house God's presence has become a brothel of spiritual infidelity. Yet even in this vision of corruption, hope flickers. God shows Ezekiel these things not to crush his spirit, but to prepare him for what comes next. Before restoration can begin, the full extent of the problem must be revealed. Truth is always the first step toward healing. Mark of the remnant. Through the corrupted temple courts walks a figure clothed in linen, carrying a writing kit at his side. He moves with divine purpose among the worshippers of false gods. His mission is mercy, disguised as judgment, to mark those who still grieve over the abominations committed in God's house. Go throughout the city of Jerusalem, the Lord commands this heavenly scribe, and put a mark on the foreheads of those who grieve and lament over all the detestable things that are done in it. Not all hearts have hardened completely. Some still ache for holiness. The marked ones are not perfect people. They have witnessed the corruption around them and felt its weight in their souls. While others celebrate the spiritual compromise, these remnant souls weep. Their tears mark them as surely as any written sign. Behind the scribe follow 6 other figures, each carrying a weapon of destruction. They wait at the threshold while the marking takes place. Mercy always precedes judgment in God's economy. Those who truly seek Him find protection even in days of wrath. The mark upon the forehead serves as a divine passport. Death will pass over those who bear it, just as it passed over Hebrew homes marked with lamb's blood in Egypt long ago. History repeats its patterns. When God's people need salvation, who receives this mark? Not the religious leaders who burn incense to false gods, not the women who weep for Tammuz, not the men who worship the rising sun. The mark goes to those whose hearts break over what breaks God's heart. Some marked ones are simple people, servants, laborers, merchants who never held positions of power. Others might be found among the priests and elders, though their numbers are few. God looks at hearts, not status. Faithfulness matters more than position. The marking process takes time. The scribe must search carefully through the city's population. Many who appear righteous on the surface prove hollow within. Others who seem insignificant carry deep wells of genuine devotion. Divine vision sees what human eyes miss. Children receive marks alongside their grieving parents. The elderly who remember better days find protection with the young who long for reform. God's remnant spans generations, united not by age, but by spiritual sensitivity to His holiness. As the marking concludes, the destroyers receive their orders. Follow him through the city and kill without showing pity or compassion. Slaughter old men, young men and maidens, women and children, but do not touch anyone who has the mark. The command sounds harsh, but it reflects the justice of perfect holiness. Those who have consistently chosen rebellion over repentance, who have hardened their hearts against every divine appeal, now face the consequences of their choices. The slaughter begins at the sanctuary itself. The very place where corruption took root becomes the starting point for cleansing. The elders who burned incense to false gods fall first. Their secret chambers become their tombs. Yet even in judgment, God's character shines through the darkness. He does not destroy indiscriminately. He preserves those who align their hearts with His. The mark of protection reveals His mercy operating within His justice. Ezekiel watches this vision unfold with growing horror and hope intermingled. Horror at the extent of judgment required. Hope at the preservation of a faithful remnant. Both emotions reflect appropriate responses to divine holiness, encountering human rebellion. The remnant will carry the future of God's people. From their faithfulness, new generations will learn true worship. Their grief over present corruption will birth joy in coming restoration. The mark that saves them today prepares them to serve tomorrow. Glory departs. The vision unfolds like a slow-motion tragedy. God's presence, which has dwelt in the temple for centuries, begins to move. Not suddenly, not in anger, but with the deliberate care of someone saying goodbye forever. Ezekiel watches from his place in Babylon, transported in spirit to Jerusalem's holy mount. The glory that once filled Solomon's temple, that blazing, untouchable light, starts to lift. First, from the Holy of Holies, that sacred inner chamber where only the high priest could enter once a year. The light hesitates, as if reluctant to leave its ancient home. Picture this moment. The temple has been God's address on earth, His dwelling place among His people. Kings came here to seek wisdom. Priests offered daily sacrifices in these courts. Pilgrims traveled from distant lands just to glimpse these sacred walls. Now, the very presence that made this place holy is packing up, preparing to leave. The glory moves to the threshold of the temple. It pauses there, suspended between staying and going. How long has God waited for his people to return? How many warnings have gone unheeded? How many prophets have pleaded with deaf ears? The patience of the Eternal finally reaches its limit. From the threshold, the presence moves to the cherubim, those mighty angelic beings with their 4 faces and wheels full of eyes. They serve as God's chariot, his divine transport, the same creatures Ezekiel saw in his first vision by the Kebar River, the same wheels within wheels spinning with otherworldly precision. The cherubim rise, their wings beat with the sound of many waters, like rushing rivers or distant thunder. The wheels turn, sparkling like precious stones in sunlight. They carry the glory of the Lord away from the temple, away from the city, toward the Mount of Olives on Jerusalem's eastern edge. There the presence stops, one final pause, one last look back at the city that was meant to be a light to the nations. Jerusalem spreads out below, its streets, its markets, its homes where children play and merchants haggle and life continues. Unaware that the divine protection that has shielded them for generations is now departing, the symbolism cuts deep. When God's presence leaves, Jerusalem becomes just another city. The temple becomes just another building. The people become just another nation, vulnerable to the storms that shake the world. No special protection, no divine favor, no miraculous intervention when enemies come calling. Ezekiel absorbs every detail of this cosmic departure. He understands what the exiles in Babylon refused to believe. Jerusalem will fall, not because God is weak, but because God is leaving. The city will burn, not because pagan gods are stronger, but because the true God has withdrawn his hand of protection. This vision explains everything, why the prophets keep crying out warnings, why disaster looms on every horizon, why even faithful people suffer alongside the rebellious. When the presence of God departs, judgment becomes inevitable. The Mount of Olives holds special meaning. Centuries later, another prophet will weep over Jerusalem from this same hill. He will speak of stones crying out and temples being destroyed. He will promise to return to this exact spot when all things are made new. But for now, it serves as a launching point for divine departure. The wheels continue to turn. The cherubim spread their wings. The glory that Moses glimpsed in the burning bush that led Israel through the wilderness as a pillar of fire and cloud that filled the tabernacle and later Solomon's temple, this same glory now lifts higher, moving beyond earthly boundaries. Ezekiel watches until the vision fades. He finds himself back in his house by the Kebar River, surrounded by his fellow exiles. They go about their daily business, tending gardens and mending nets and discussing the latest news from home. They have no idea what he has just witnessed. They cannot fathom that God himself has become a refugee, driven from his own house by the unfaithfulness of his own people. The prophet sits in stunned silence. How do you explain the unexplainable? How do you describe the indescribable? How do you convince people that their greatest protection has just walked away? They still believe Jerusalem is invincible because God lives there. They cannot grasp that God has moved out. This departure changes everything. No longer can Israel claim special status simply by pointing to the temple. No longer can they assume divine favor regardless of their actions. No longer can they ignore the demands of justice and mercy while hiding behind religious rituals. God's presence must be earned through faithfulness, not taken for granted through heritage. The vision reveals God's mobility. He is not trapped in buildings made by human hands. He is not limited to one location or one people. If his chosen nation rejects him, he can dwell elsewhere. If his holy city becomes corrupt, he can find another home. The God of Israel is also the God of Babylon, the God of exile, the God who meets his people wherever they truly seek him. Ezekiel carries this burden alone. The departure of divine glory is not a secret to be whispered, but a reality to be proclaimed. Yet who will listen? Who will believe that God has abandoned his favorite city? Who will accept that the unthinkable has become inevitable? The Mount of Olives grows quiet, the vision ends, but the memory burns in the prophet's mind like a brand. He has witnessed the end of an era, the close of the age when God's presence could be assumed, when divine favor could be taken for granted, when judgment could be postponed indefinitely. A new chapter begins, written in exile and marked by absence. The glory has departed, nothing will ever be the same. Street prophecies and public scorn. The streets of the exile settlement buzz with whispers about the strange priest. Ezekiel has become the neighborhood oddity, the man who speaks in riddles and acts out impossible things. Children dare each other to get close enough to hear his mutterings. Adults shake their heads and hurry past, embarrassed by his behavior. Every morning brings a new performance. Today, he builds a miniature city from clay bricks, complete with tiny walls and watchtowers. Tomorrow he might lie on his side for hours, eating carefully measured portions of bread. Next week, he could be found shaving his head with a sword, dividing his hair into careful piles. The other exiles watch from a safe distance, torn between curiosity and disgust. The elders gather in small groups to discuss the Ezekiel problem. Some call him mad. Others wonder if he might be dangerous. A few suggest he could be a genuine prophet, but they quickly dismiss the idea. Prophets are supposed to bring comfort, not confusion. They should offer hope, not horror. They certainly should not make spectacles of themselves in public squares. Local children create games based on his actions. They build mud cities and knock them down. They lie perfectly still, pretending to be under divine command. They make up nonsense words and claim to be speaking prophecy. Parents scold them for mocking holy things, but the games continue anyway. Ezekiel ignores the stares and snickers. He has work to do, messages to deliver, warnings to sound. God has made him a living sign, a walking symbol of coming judgment. His body has become a canvas for divine communication. His daily routine serves as scripture for those with eyes to see. The isolation deepens with each passing day. Former friends cross the street to avoid him. Neighbors stop inviting him to social gatherings. Even fellow priests keep their distance, worried that association with him might damage their own reputations. Ezekiel finds himself alone in crowds, surrounded by people but cut off from normal human connection. Then comes the hardest test of all. His wife falls ill. She has been his closest companion through all the strangeness, the one person who understands his calling without explanation. She watches his performances without judgment, listens to his visions without doubt, supports his ministry without complaint. She is his anchor in a world gone mad, his reminder that he is still human, despite the divine fire burning in his bones. The sickness takes her quickly. One day she is helping him prepare props for another sign act. The next she is burning with fever. Within a week she lies dying, her breath shallow and labored. Ezekiel sits beside her bed, holding her hand, praying for healing that does not come. God speaks to him in those final hours. The message chills his soul. When she dies, he must not mourn. No tears, no wailing, no traditional grief. He must bind up his turban, put on his sandals, cover his mustache, and eat the bread of mourners. But he must do it all in silence, without the outward signs of sorrow that custom demands. His wife passes at sunset. The community expects him to tear his clothes, throw dust on his head, and cry out in anguish. Instead, he washes her body with careful tenderness, wraps her in clean linen, and buries her without ceremony. He returns home and sits in silence, his face dry, his voice still. The neighbors are horrified. What kind of man shows no grief for his beloved wife? What sort of husband buries his companion like she meant nothing to him? The whispers grow louder. Some label him as heartless. Others speculate that he never truly loved her at all. A few begin to wonder if he has finally completely lost his mind. Yet Ezekiel's silence speaks with more volume than any wailing ever could. His dry eyes communicate more than rivers of tears ever would. His controlled behavior delivers a message that no amount of screaming could match. He has transformed into a living parable of what is approaching Jerusalem. Just as he cannot mourn his personal loss, the people will soon be too overwhelmed by collective tragedy to grieve individual deaths. The sign act penetrates its way into the community's consciousness. People begin to comprehend that his strange behavior points to something beyond itself. His wife's death and his response to it serve as a preview of coming attractions. Soon, everyone will lose loved ones. Soon, grief will become so common that mourning rituals will seem inadequate. Soon, survival will require the kind of emotional numbness that Ezekiel now displays. Morning arrives, and the prophet resumes his public ministry. He constructs another clay city, sets up another siege. But now his actions carry new weight. The man who buried his wife without tears is the same man warning of Jerusalem's destruction. His personal loss validates his public message. His private grief, though hidden, authenticates his prophetic authority. The crowd gathers as usual, but the atmosphere has changed. The mocking laughter fades to uncomfortable silence. The casual dismissal turns to reluctant attention. The easy explanations no longer satisfy. This is not just a mad priest acting out fantasies. This is a man who has paid the price for his calling, who has sacrificed everything for his message. Ezekiel speaks rarely, but when words come, they cut like swords. He explains the meaning of his wife's death and his response to it. He connects personal loss to national catastrophe. He shows how individual suffering mirrors collective judgment. His grief, though unexpressed, becomes a window into God's heart over rebellious Israel. Some listeners begin to perceive the pattern. The clay cities represent Jerusalem. The measured food portions predict siege conditions. The hair scattered to the wind symbolizes exile and death. The lack of mourning for his wife foreshadows a time when grief will be too overwhelming for traditional expression. Each strange act serves as one note in a larger symphony of warning. Others remain skeptical. They prefer their prophets to be more conventional, their messages to be more encouraging, their signs to be more obviously miraculous. A man who speaks in symbols and acts out judgments does not fit their expectations of divine communication. They continue to dismiss him as disturbed rather than inspired. But Ezekiel persists. His calling does not depend on popular approval. His authority comes from God, not from human recognition. His message remains true, whether people accept it or reject it. He has become a faithful watchman, sounding the alarm whether the city chooses to wake up or sleep through the danger. The street prophecies continue. The public scorn persists, but something has shifted in the exile community. The man they once dismissed as merely eccentric has revealed depths of sacrifice and commitment that demand respect. His willingness to endure personal loss for the sake of his message forces even skeptics to reconsider. Perhaps there is more to Ezekiel than meets the eye. Perhaps his strangeness conceals wisdom. Perhaps his warnings deserve a hearing. After all, the fall of Jerusalem foretold. The prophet's voice carries across the settlement with terrible certainty. No more riddles, no more symbols, no more acted parables. The time for clear speech has arrived, and Ezekiel delivers it with surgical precision. Jerusalem will fall, the temple will burn, the people will die by sword, famine, and plague. The unthinkable has become inevitable. He stands in the marketplace where merchants haggle over grain and pottery. His words slice through the ordinary business of daily life like a blade through silk. Women carrying water jars pause to listen. Children stop their games. Even the most skeptical elders find themselves drawn into the prophet's orbit as he paints a picture of coming catastrophe. The siege will begin, he declares, when Babylon's armies surround the city like hunters closing in on trapped prey. The walls that have protected Jerusalem for centuries will become prison bars, locking the inhabitants inside with their growing desperation. Food will grow scarce, then precious, then non-existent. Water will be rationed drop by drop. The wealthy will eat their jewelry. The poor will gnaw on leather sandals. Mothers will eye their children with unnatural hunger. Fathers will hide scraps of moldy bread from their own families. The most refined women will fight over the bones of donkeys. Cannibalism will transform the holy city into a place of horror that makes pagan nations seem civilized by comparison. The taboos that separate humans from beasts will crumble under the weight of starvation. Ezekiel names specific leaders who will fall. King Zedekiah, who thinks his political maneuvering can save the kingdom, will watch his sons die before his own eyes are put out. The last thing he will see is the end of the Davidic line, at least as far as earthly kingdoms are concerned. He will be dragged to Babylon in chains, a broken puppet king whose strings have been cut. The false prophets who promise easy peace will discover how empty their words sound when siege engines batter the gates. The priests who have compromised with idolatry will find their rituals powerless against Babylonian battering rams. The nobles who have oppressed the poor will learn what it means to beg for mercy from foreign soldiers who understand no appeals for special treatment. Fire will consume the cedar beams of Solomon's temple. The gold will melt and run in streams down the Temple Mount. The bronze pillars that symbolize God's eternal presence will be broken and carted away as scrap metal. The Holy of Holies will be stripped bare, its sacred objects either destroyed or carried off as trophies for pagan gods. The prophet describes the final assault with the clarity of an eyewitness. Babylonian soldiers will pour through breached walls like water through a broken dam. They will show no mercy to age or gender. Children will die clutching their mothers' robes. Old men will fall defending doorways. Young women will face horrors worse than death. The streets will run red with blood, and birds will feast on corpses until they cannot fly. Some listeners cover their ears, unable to bear the details. Others argue that Ezekiel goes too far, that God would never allow such destruction to befall his chosen people. A few demand proof, asking for signs and wonders to validate these terrible predictions. But the prophet continues his litany of coming judgment without pause or apology. The survivors, he declares, will envy the dead. Those who escape the sword will face exile in foreign lands, separated from everything that gives life meaning. They will work as slaves for masters who care nothing for their heritage or their God. Their children will grow up speaking Babylonian instead of Hebrew, worshipping Babylonian gods instead of the Lord of Israel. The temple treasures will decorate pagan shrines. Sacred vessels will hold wine for drunken festivals. The Ark of the Covenant, if it survives, will become a curiosity in some foreign museum. Everything holy will be made common. Everything pure will be defiled. Everything that seemed permanent will prove as fragile as morning mist. Yet even in this catalogue of horrors, hints of hope flicker. The exile will not last forever. The scattered people will eventually return. The temple will be rebuilt, though different from before. God's purposes will survive even total national collapse. But that restoration lies far in the future, beyond the immediate catastrophe that now approaches like a storm front. Ezekiel's audience struggles to process such comprehensive destruction. Some accuse him of exaggeration, claiming no city could suffer so completely and still survive. Others suggest he has been influenced by Babylonian propaganda, that enemy agents have corrupted his message. A few wonder if he speaks from personal bitterness, letting his own suffering color his prophecies with unnecessary darkness. But the prophet remains unmoved by criticism. He has seen the vision of God's glory departing from the temple. He has witnessed the corruption behind Jerusalem's religious facade. He has watched divine patience reach its breaking point. His warnings come not from hatred but from love, not from despair but from desperate hope, that even at this late hour, repentance might still make a difference. The specificity of his predictions lends them credibility. He does not speak in vague generalities but in concrete details. He names names, describes events, sets timelines. His prophecies have the ring of historical fact even before they happen. This precision will either validate his calling or destroy his reputation completely. There is no middle ground. As the prophet concludes his dire forecast, silence settles over the marketplace. The ordinary sounds of commerce and conversation seem trivial in the wake of such momentous words. Some listeners drift away, shaking their heads and muttering about false prophets. Others remain, staring at Ezekiel with new respect and growing fear. The sun sets over the exile settlement, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Tomorrow will bring new prophecies, new warnings, new attempts to wake a sleeping people before the hammer falls. But tonight, the words hang in the air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying the scent of coming destruction to anyone with the courage to breathe deeply and face the truth. Jerusalem's fate has been pronounced. The countdown has begun. Nothing remains but to wait and see whether the city will heed the warning or sleep through its final alarm. The prophet has done his job. The rest lies in other hands. Judgment on the leaders. The prophet's anger burns like forged fire as he turns his attention to those who should have protected but instead devoured. The shepherds of Israel have become wolves, caring only for their own comfort, while the flock scattered and died. Ezekiel's words strike like hammer blows against the anvil of corruption that has shaped the nation's downfall. These are not distant kings from foreign lands, but Israel's own leaders, the men who should have guided with wisdom but have led with greed. Those called to serve have chosen to take. Those appointed to protect have become predators. From the palace to the temple, from the courtroom to the marketplace, leadership has rotted from within. The kings come first in this divine indictment. They wear crowns but think like bandits. They collect taxes like tribute from conquered enemies. They make laws to benefit themselves and ignore justice for the common people. Their palaces grow larger while their subjects grow poorer. They feast while their people starve, celebrate while their nation crumbles. King Zedekiah, the current puppet on Jerusalem's throne, receives special attention. He breaks oaths like a child breaks toys, making promises to Babylon and Egypt with equal enthusiasm and equal insincerity. His word means nothing. His treaties are written on water. He thinks political cleverness can replace moral courage, that shifting alliances can substitute for faithful leadership. But the corruption runs deeper than royal irresponsibility. The princes, those nobles who should advise the king with wisdom, have become accomplices in national destruction. They flatter instead of counsel, enable instead of restrain, profit instead of serve. They turn the palace into a marketplace where everything has a price and nothing has value. The judges fare no better in this litany of leadership failure. They twist laws like blacksmiths bend metal, shaping justice to fit their personal interests. Rich plaintiffs receive favorable verdicts, while poor defendants face predetermined condemnation. The scales of justice tip toward whoever offers the largest bribe. Courtrooms become theaters where truth is performed, but never pursued. Ezekiel's fury extends to the religious establishment that has abandoned its calling. The prophets who should speak God's words instead invent comfortable lies. They see visions that exist only in their imagination and dream dreams that serve only their ambition. They promise peace when war approaches, blessing when curse descends, prosperity when judgment arrives. These false prophets plaster over cracks in the national foundation with weak mortar that will not hold. They paint over rust instead of removing it. They prescribe pleasant remedies for deadly diseases. When the people cry for bread, these prophets offer stones, decorated to look like loaves. When the nation thirsts for righteousness, they provide wells full of sand. The priests receive equal condemnation for their betrayal of sacred trust. They have turned the temple into a marketplace where everything is for sale. They offer sacrifices to the highest bidder and blessings to the most generous donor. They make no distinction between holy and common, clean and unclean, sacred and profane. The law becomes clay in their hands, molded to fit whatever shape brings the most profit. These priests have forgotten that they serve God, not their own appetites. They eat the sin offerings but ignore the sins. They collect tithes but neglect teaching. They maintain the ritual calendar but abandon moral instruction. The people learn ceremony from them, but not character, tradition, but not truth. Ezekiel paints a picture of shepherds who eat the sheep instead of feeding them. They drink the milk, wear the wool, and slaughter the fattest animals for their own tables. The weak go unstrengthened, the sick unhealed, the injured unbound. The lost remain lost, while the shepherds feast on the flock they were meant to protect. The scattered sheep wander through mountains and hills with no one to search for them or care about their fate. They become food for wild beasts because their shepherds have abandoned them to pursue personal pleasure. On cloudy and dark days, when danger approaches and the flock needs guidance most, the shepherds are nowhere to be found. Divine judgment awaits these faithless leaders. God will require his flock at their hands. He will search for his sheep himself and rescue them from all the places where they have been scattered. The shepherds, who have fed only themselves, will face the hunger they have caused others to endure. The leaders, who have abandoned their responsibilities, will discover what it means to be abandoned themselves. The princes will fall from their thrones into dust. The corrupt judges will face a court where no bribes are accepted and no appeals heard. The false prophets will find their lying visions turned against them like swords. The unfaithful priests will be stripped of their holy garments and left to face God's justice wearing only their shame. But this judgment serves a larger purpose than mere punishment. It clears the way for new leadership, faithful shepherds who will truly care for the flock. God himself will become their shepherd, leading them to good pasture and protecting them from harm. He will seek the lost, bring back the scattered, bind up the injured, and strengthen the weak. A new kind of ruler will emerge, one after the heart of David. This coming shepherd will govern with justice and righteousness, making no distinction between rich and poor, powerful and weak. He will feed the flock instead of feeding on them, protect instead of exploit, serve instead of demand service. The indictment of current leaders serves as a blueprint for future restoration. By showing what shepherds should not do, the prophecy reveals what true leadership looks like. By condemning the failures of the present, it points toward the promise of something better coming. The darkness of judgment becomes the contrast that makes the light of hope shine brighter. Ezekiel's words echo across the exile settlement with the force of divine thunder. The leaders he condemns are not present to defend themselves, but their defenders among the exiles shift uncomfortably. Everyone knows someone who has profited from corruption, benefited from injustice, or turned a blind eye to oppression. The prophet's accusations cut close to home. Some listeners nod in recognition, having suffered under the kind of leadership Ezekiel describes. Others question whether any human government can avoid such failures. A few wonder what kind of shepherd God himself will prove to be when he takes direct control of his scattered flock. The answers to these questions lie hidden in the future, but the promise of change offers hope to those weary of being devoured by those who should have cared for them. Oracles against the nations. The prophet's gaze sweeps beyond Israel's borders like a searchlight cutting through darkness. God's judgment extends far beyond one chosen people to encompass all nations that have rejoiced in Jerusalem's suffering. No country is too distant, no kingdom too powerful, no people too foreign to escape divine scrutiny. The same God who disciplines his own children will settle accounts with their enemies. Ammon receives first attention, that neighbor nation east of the Jordan River. They have clapped their hands and stamped their feet with glee at Israel's downfall. They have said, "Aha," over the desecrated sanctuary, the desolated land, and the exiled people. Their celebration makes them targets for divine retribution. Eastern peoples will overrun their territory, making their cities pastures for camels and their towns resting places for flocks. The Ammonites thought geography would protect them. The desert stretches between them and Babylon's armies like a moat around a castle, but distance cannot shield them from God's anger. Their mockery of Israel's suffering will return on their own heads, multiplied. They will learn what exile feels like, what destruction tastes like, what it means to become a byword among nations. Moab follows in the catalogue of judgment, that southern neighbor that shares Ammon's scorn for Israel's troubles. They have declared that Judah has become like all other nations, stripped of special status and divine protection. This dismissal of God's unique relationship with his people earns them a place on the list of nations marked for destruction. Their cities will become ruins, their pride will be humbled, and their name will be forgotten among the peoples. The Moabites trusted in their mountain fortresses and hidden valleys. They believed their ancient gods would protect them as they had protected their ancestors. But no fortress can withstand divine siege engines, no valley can hide from omniscient eyes, no god can stand against the Lord of hosts. Their confidence will prove as fragile as pottery before a hammer. Edom bears special guilt that merits extended condemnation. These descendants of Esau should have helped their brother Jacob in his time of trouble. Instead, they stood aloof while strangers carried off Jerusalem's wealth. They rejoiced over Judah's destruction and delivered survivors to their enemies. They acted like wolves when they should have acted like brothers. The blood bond between Israel and Edom makes this betrayal particularly heinous. When Jerusalem fell, Edom should have opened its borders to refugees, offered food to the hungry, and provided shelter to the homeless. Instead, they blocked escape routes and handed fugitives over to Babylonian soldiers. They profited from their brother's misfortune and celebrated his catastrophe. Divine vengeance will transform Edom from a nation into a wasteland. From Teman to Dedan, their territory will become desolate. They will fall by the sword of Israel's own hand when restoration comes. Their mountain strongholds will become dens for jackals. Their proud cities will house only owls and ravens. The nation that should have shown brotherhood will discover what it means to be truly alone. Philistia, that ancient enemy along the Mediterranean coast, cannot escape notice either. For generations, they have acted with malicious hearts against Israel, seeking revenge for old defeats and harboring ancient grudges. They have taken vengeance with spite, destroying without restraint whenever opportunity arose. Their hatred runs so deep that they celebrate every Israelite setback as personal victory. The Philistines thought the sea would protect them, that their ships could carry them to safety if judgment came. They believed their strong cities could withstand any siege, that their gods would defend them as they had in battles past. But the same divine hand that once gave them victory will now ensure their defeat. Their coastal strongholds will fall, their ships will be broken, and their remnant will be cut off. These oracles against surrounding nations serve multiple purposes beyond simple prediction. They demonstrate that God's justice extends beyond Israel's borders to encompass all peoples. No nation can oppress his chosen people without consequence. No kingdom can rejoice in Israel's suffering without facing judgment themselves. The God of Israel rules over all nations, not just his covenant people. The prophecies also provide comfort to the exiles who hear them. Their suffering has not gone unnoticed. Their enemies' celebrations will be short-lived. The nations that mock their downfall will face their own destruction. Justice may be delayed, but it will not be denied. The same divine power that scattered Israel in judgment will scatter their enemies in turn. Each oracle follows a similar pattern. The nation's sin is identified, usually involving pride, violence, or rejoicing over Israel's troubles. Then comes the announcement of coming judgment, often describing the specific form destruction will take. Finally, there is recognition that this punishment comes from Israel's God, demonstrating his sovereignty over all peoples and nations. The cumulative effect builds toward a larger point about divine justice and international relations. Nations cannot treat God's people as they please without consequences. Alliances and enmities formed on earth register in heavenly courts. Political decisions have moral dimensions that extend beyond immediate practical concerns to eternal spiritual realities. Some might wonder why Israel's God concerns himself with foreign nations at all. The answer lies in his universal sovereignty and special relationship with Israel. As creator of all peoples, he has authority over all kingdoms. As Israel's protector, he must defend them against all enemies. As righteous judge, he must punish all oppression wherever it occurs. The oracles also hint at restoration beyond judgment. When these hostile nations fall, Israel's path back to prominence becomes clearer. When enemies are removed, friends can flourish. When oppressors are punished, the oppressed can be vindicated. The destruction of Israel's foes creates space for Israel's renewal. Ezekiel delivers these international prophecies with the same authority he brings to domestic warnings. Distance does not diminish divine power. Foreign languages do not confuse divine communication. Pagan religions do not limit divine judgment. The God who speaks through Hebrew prophets rules over Babylonian kings and Egyptian pharaohs with equal ease. The scope of these oracles reveals the true magnitude of Israel's God. He is not a tribal deity with limited jurisdiction, but the universal sovereign with authority over all nations. His justice extends to every people. His power reaches every kingdom. His knowledge encompasses every secret. No nation is too far away, too powerful, or too foreign to escape his notice or his judgment. Tyre and the fall of the proud. The great city rises from the Mediterranean waters like a crown jewel set in silver. Tyre, queen of the ancient world's trade routes, mistress of purple dye and cedarwood, ruler of merchant ships that carry cargo to every known harbor. Her wealth flows like rivers, her influence spreads like morning light, her pride towers like her famous lighthouse. Yet this same pride will become her downfall. Ezekiel's vision of Tyre's destruction reads like an epic poem, a lament for beauty destroyed by its own arrogance. The prophet sees past the gleaming walls and busy harbors to the corruption beneath. This city has built its fortune on the misfortune of others, celebrated competitors' failures, and profited from every regional disaster. When Jerusalem fell, Tyre's merchants rubbed their hands together with glee, knowing trade routes would flow through their ports instead. The city's location seems to guarantee eternal security. Built partly on the mainland and partly on an island, Tyre enjoys natural protection that has frustrated many would-be conquerors. The Mediterranean serves as her moat, her ships as her cavalry, her merchant network as her intelligence service. She has grown wealthy by staying neutral in conflicts, selling weapons to both sides and goods to whoever pays best. But geography cannot protect against divine judgment. The same waters that shield Tyre will become the instrument of her destruction. Ezekiel prophesies that many nations will come against her like the sea churning up its waves. They will break down her walls, destroy her towers, and scrape her dust from her stones until nothing remains but bare rock where fishermen spread their nets. The prophet names Nebuchadnezzar as the immediate agent of judgment. The Babylonian king will bring horses, chariots, and cavalry against the city. His siege engines will batter her walls, while his troops fill her streets with the sound of battle. The pillars of her strength will fall to the ground. Her gates will be broken down, and her defenders will be trampled under the hooves of his horses. Tyre's commercial empire becomes the focus of a detailed lament that reads like an ancient business report. Ships from Tarshish carry her merchandise. Craftsmen from Sidon and Arvad serve as her sailors. Elders from Gebel caulk her seams. Warriors from Persia, Lud, and Put hang their shields on her walls. Her market includes everything from horses and mules to emeralds and coral, from wheat and honey to lambs and goats. This catalogue of commerce reveals both Tyre's reach and her vulnerability. A city that depends on international trade for survival cannot survive when international relations collapse. When wars disrupt shipping lanes, merchant cities starve. When political alliances shift, trade agreements crumble. Tyre's strength lies in her connections, but those same connections become weaknesses when the world turns hostile. The lament continues with poetic beauty that makes the coming destruction more poignant. Tyre is described as a ship of state, perfectly constructed from the finest materials. Her planks come from cypress trees of Senir, her mast from Lebanon cedars. Her oars are carved from Bashan's oaks, her deck inlaid with ivory. Her sails are made of fine linen from Egypt, her awnings dyed blue and purple from Cyprus. This magnificent vessel faces shipwreck in the heart of the seas. The east wind will break her in pieces, causing her wealth, merchandise, and crew to sink into the depths. Her beauty will become a memory, her power a cautionary tale, her pride a warning to other nations that trust in riches rather than righteousness. The king of Tyre receives special attention as the embodiment of human pride, reaching for divine status. He claims to be a god, sitting on the throne of gods in the heart of the seas. His wisdom and understanding have increased his riches, and his riches have made his heart proud. He thinks his mind equals divine intelligence, his power matches divine authority, his position rivals divine sovereignty. But he is only a man, not a god, though he imagines himself divine. Strangers will draw their swords against his beauty and wisdom, bringing him down to the pit. They will kill him a violent death in the heart of the seas. His claim to godhood will seem hollow when he faces the terror of those who slay him. The prophecy shifts into even more mysterious territory, as it describes the king of Tyre as if he were the original pattern of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. He was in Eden, God's garden, covered with precious stones and gold. He was an anointed guardian cherub on God's holy mountain, walking among fiery stones until wickedness was found in him. This passage may refer to the original fall from grace that preceded all human pride, or it may use mythological language to describe how earthly rulers echo ancient patterns of rebellion. Either way, the message remains clear. Pride leads to destruction, claims of divinity result in death, and beauty corrupted by arrogance becomes ugliness beyond repair. The lament concludes with Tyre's complete obliteration. She will become a terror, sought but never found again. Her island fortress will be scraped clean and left as a place for spreading nets. Her mainland territories will be given to plunder. Her daughters in the countryside will be slaughtered by the sword. Then all will know that the Lord has spoken. Other nations will react with horror at Tyre's fall. The princes of the sea will step down from their thrones, remove their robes, and clothe themselves with trembling. They will sit on the ground, shudder continually, and be appalled at the city's fate. They will take up a lament over her, asking how the renowned city, mighty on the seas, could be destroyed along with her inhabitants. The terror of Tyre's destruction will spread like ripples from a stone thrown into still water. If a city so strong, so wealthy, so seemingly secure can fall, what hope do lesser powers have? If the Queen of Commerce can be brought low, who can claim safety? If the mistress of the seas can be drowned, who can trust in earthly protection? Yet beneath this lament for a fallen city lies a deeper message about the nature of pride and its consequences. Tyre represents every human attempt to build security apart from God, to find meaning in wealth rather than righteousness, to trust in human wisdom rather than divine guidance. Her fall serves as warning to all who think they can build kingdoms that will last forever. The prophecy also reveals God's sovereignty over international affairs. He raises up nations and brings them down according to his purposes. He uses one kingdom to judge another, then judges the instrument he used. Babylon will destroy Tyre, but Babylon itself will face judgment in turn. No earthly power remains supreme for long in the divine economy. Tyre's merchants, scattered across the known world, will mourn her destruction because their livelihood depended on her prosperity. But their grief reveals the shallow foundation of relationships built only on profit. When the source of wealth disappears, the friendships disappear with it. When trade ceases, loyalty ends. When profit margins shrink, alliances crumble. The city that seemed eternal proves temporal. The wealth that seemed permanent proves fragile. The power that seemed absolute proves limited. Tyre's fall demonstrates that everything built on human pride and worldly wisdom carries within itself the seeds of its own destruction. Only what is founded on divine truth can withstand the storms that test all human achievements. Fishermen will spread their nets where merchant princes once walked. Waves will wash over foundations where palaces once stood. Silence will replace the sound of busy markets, and desolation will cover ground where treasures once accumulated. The transformation will be so complete that travelers will struggle to believe such a city ever existed. This vision of Tyre's destruction serves multiple purposes in Ezekiel's larger message. It warns Israel's enemies that God notices their rejoicing over Jerusalem's fall and will repay them accordingly. It comforts Israel's exiles by promising that their oppressors will face judgment. Most importantly, it demonstrates that God's justice extends beyond ethnic boundaries to encompass all nations and peoples. The fall of the proud echoes throughout history as empires rise and fall, as kingdoms flourish and fade, as cities boom and bust. Tyre's story becomes every story of human pride meeting divine justice, of earthly wisdom confronting heavenly truth, of temporal power encountering eternal authority. Her lament becomes a song that each generation must learn anew, lest they repeat her mistakes and share her fate. The watchman's burden. Silence hangs over the exile settlement like morning mist. Word has not come from Jerusalem for months now, and the absence of news creates its own terrible presence. The exiles go about their daily tasks, tending gardens, mending tools, teaching children. But underneath the routine lies a growing dread. Something has happened, something final. Ezekiel sits by his house, watching the horizon, as if messengers might appear at any moment. God has made him a watchman, responsible for warning his people of approaching danger. But what happens when the danger has already arrived? What does a watchman do when the city he was meant to protect has perhaps already fallen? The role of watchman carries unbearable weight. In ancient times, watchmen stood on high towers, scanning the horizon for approaching armies, signal fires, or mounted messengers carrying urgent news. Their eyes served the entire community. Their vigilance protected sleeping families. Their warning cries could mean the difference between life and death for thousands of people. God has appointed Ezekiel to this same function for the house of Israel. He must watch for divine warnings and sound the alarm when judgment approaches. If he sees the sword coming and fails to blow the trumpet, the blood of those who die unprepared will be required at his hands. But if he warns them and they refuse to listen, their blood will be on their own heads. This divine appointment creates an impossible situation. The people he is meant to warn are scattered across Babylon, far from their homeland, and growing distant from their faith. Many have decided that the old ways no longer apply in their new circumstances. Some have embraced Babylonian customs, married foreign spouses, and adopted local gods. Others maintain the forms of religion while abandoning its substance. The message Ezekiel must deliver offers no comfort to those seeking easy answers. God takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but he will not ignore wickedness either. The righteous person who turns from righteousness will die for their iniquity. The wicked person who turns from wickedness will live despite their past. Each individual stands responsible for their own choices, their own actions, their own destiny. This teaching about individual responsibility cuts against the grain of traditional thinking. The exiles want to blame their situation on their ancestors' sins, on corrupt leaders, on circumstances beyond their control. They quote proverbs about children's teeth being set on edge by sour grapes their parents ate. They insist that they suffer for crimes they did not commit, penalties they do not deserve. But God declares through his watchmen that each person will be judged according to their own deeds, not the deeds of their fathers or children. The son will not bear the iniquity of the father, nor will the father bear the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous will be upon them alone, and the wickedness of the wicked will be upon them alone. This emphasis on personal accountability both terrifies and liberates the exiles. They can no longer hide behind family heritage or community identity. Each must face God individually, answer for personal choices, take responsibility for private actions. But this same individualism means that past failures need not determine future destiny. Repentance can change everything. Turning from wickedness to righteousness can save a life. Ezekiel struggles with the loneliness of his calling. A watchman stands apart from the community he serves, separate but not disconnected, responsible but not controlling. He can warn but cannot compel. He can sound the alarm but cannot force people to wake up. He can point out danger but cannot drag people to safety. The prophet's own family situation illustrates this painful separation. His wife's death, which he was forbidden to mourn publicly, has left him isolated even from normal human grief. His strange behaviors have made him a community oddity. His dire predictions have earned him a reputation as a bringer of bad news. Children avoid him, neighbors whisper about him, and even fellow priests keep their distance. Yet, he continues to fulfill his calling because the alternative is unthinkable. If he remains silent when he should speak, innocent blood will stain his hands. If he fails to warn the wicked, their deaths will be charged to his account. If he abandons his post as watchman, the entire community becomes vulnerable to dangers they never see coming. The burden grows heavier as time passes without news from home. Has Jerusalem fallen? Are the temple walls breached? Do his prophecies of destruction prove accurate, or do they mark him as a false prophet whose words deserve no hearing? The uncertainty torments him more than definitive bad news would. Sometimes he wonders if God has forgotten him, left him standing watch over a community that no longer exists. Other times he fears that his warnings have been too harsh, that he has driven people away from God rather than toward him. The weight of responsibility for other people's souls presses down on him like a physical burden he cannot set aside. But then he remembers the vision that started it all, the glory of God appearing by the Kebar River, the commission to speak whether people listen or refuse to listen, the promise that he would not be alone in his task. God has not forgotten his watchmen any more than he has forgotten his people. The silence may be long, but it will not be permanent. The role of watchman extends beyond mere warning to include encouragement and instruction. When people come to him seeking guidance, he must speak words of life to those ready to receive them. When individuals express genuine repentance, he must assure them of God's willingness to forgive. When the righteous grow discouraged, he must remind them that their perseverance has value. This positive aspect of the watchman's calling provides some relief from the weight of constant warning. Not every message brings news of judgment. Some carry promises of restoration, hope for the future, assurance of God's continued love for his people despite their current circumstances. The same mouth that speaks words of condemnation also speaks words of comfort. The exiles slowly begin to understand that their watchman speaks from love, not hatred. His warnings come from concern for their welfare, not desire for their destruction. His harsh words mask a heart that breaks over their spiritual condition, that longs to see them return to the God who still waits to receive them with open arms. As evening approaches, Ezekiel continues his vigil, scanning the horizon for signs of approaching messengers. His eyes may be the first to spot the runner who will bring news from Jerusalem. His ears may be the first to hear the account of the city's fate. His voice will be the first to interpret what this news means for the exile community. The watchman's burden continues day after day, night after night. But it is a burden he carries willingly, knowing that someone must stand guard while others sleep, someone must watch while others work, someone must warn while others assume that safety can be taken for granted. God has chosen him for this task, and he will not abandon his post regardless of the personal cost. A fugitive arrives. The runner appears at sunset, a lone figure stumbling across the dusty plain toward the exile settlement. His clothes are torn, his face streaked with dirt and ash, his eyes hollow with the weight of terrible news. The children spot him first, pointing and calling to their parents. Adults emerge from their houses, shading their eyes against the dying light, trying to make sense of this unexpected arrival. Ezekiel rises from his place by the gate, where he has maintained his silent vigil for months. Something about this approaching figure sends electricity through his bones, a recognition that transcends sight or sound. This is the moment he has been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The news is coming at last. The fugitive collapses at the settlement's edge, gasping for breath, unable to speak coherently. Water is brought. and gentle hands help him sit upright. Slowly, between gulps of air and sips of water, his story emerges in broken fragments that piece together into a picture of unimaginable devastation. Jerusalem has fallen. The walls are breached, the gates broken down, the buildings burned. Babylonian soldiers poured through the city like floodwater through a broken dam. The temple is gone. Not damaged, not partially destroyed, but completely eliminated. The sacred building that had stood for nearly 4 centuries has been reduced to rubble and ash. The people gather in growing silence as more details emerge. King Zedekiah tried to escape through the garden gate under cover of darkness, but Babylonian troops caught him on the plains of Jericho. They forced him to watch as his sons were executed before his eyes, then put out his own eyes so that sight would be the last thing he ever saw. He was carried away to Babylon in chains, a broken man who had lost everything. The temple treasures are gone, carted off to decorate pagan shrines in distant Babylon. The bronze pillars that symbolized God's strength have been broken up and hauled away as scrap metal. The golden articles that once held sacred offerings now serve profane purposes in foreign temples. Everything holy has been made common, everything pure defiled. Most of the population is dead or scattered. Some died fighting on the walls. Others starved during the siege. Still others were executed after the city fell. Those who survived the initial conquest face forced marches to exile in various parts of the Babylonian Empire. Families have been separated, communities disbanded, the social fabric of the nation torn beyond repair. The fugitives' account confirms every detail of Ezekiel's prophecies with terrifying accuracy. The siege, the famine, the cannibalism, the final assault, all happened exactly as the prophet had predicted. The rulers he named have fallen. The false prophets have been silenced. The corrupt priests have been swept away. Divine judgment has been thorough and complete. But perhaps most shocking of all is the news about the temple. Many exiles had assumed that God would never allow his dwelling place to be destroyed, that he would intervene at the last moment to protect his sanctuary. They believed that Jerusalem's walls might fall and the palace might burn, but surely the temple would remain inviolate. The reality proves how completely they misunderstood the situation. Ezekiel listens to the account with mixed emotions. Vindication comes at a terrible price. His prophecies have proven accurate, but accuracy in this case means national catastrophe. He finds no satisfaction in being right about such devastating events. The confirmation of his calling costs too much in human suffering to provide any personal pleasure. The crowd around the fugitive grows larger as word spreads through the settlement. Families who had relatives in Jerusalem press closer, desperate for any news about loved ones. Merchants who had business interests in the city want to know about their investments. Everyone seeks some personal connection to the larger tragedy being described. Some listeners react with stunned silence, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what has happened. Others break into wailing and mourning, finally giving vent to grief they have suppressed for months. A few express anger, demanding to know why God allowed such destruction to fall on his chosen people and his holy city. The reactions are as varied as the individuals who hear the news. Ezekiel himself experiences a strange transformation. For months, he has been bound by demand to remain silent, except when delivering specific messages. His tongue has been restricted, his words carefully measured, his prophecies delivered at appointed times. But now, with the news of Jerusalem's fall confirmed, the restraint is lifted. The prophet who has been known for his silence becomes fluent again. Words flow from him like water from a broken dam. He begins to speak of restoration, of hope, of divine promises that extend beyond judgment to renewal. The same mouth that pronounced doom over Jerusalem now speaks of its eventual rebuilding. The same voice that warned of exile now promises return. This shift from judgment to hope marks a turning point in Ezekiel's ministry. The first phase of his calling is complete. He has warned of coming disaster, acted out divine judgment, and seen his predictions fulfilled. Now begins the second phase, comforting the afflicted, promising restoration, and preparing his people for an eventual return to their homeland. The fugitive's arrival serves multiple purposes beyond simply bringing news. His presence validates the prophet's credibility and establishes his authority among the exiles. No longer can they dismiss Ezekiel as a deranged priest with delusions of grandeur. His predictions have proven accurate in every detail, marking him as a true spokesman for God. The news also forces the exile community to face reality in ways they have avoided for years. Many have clung to false hopes of quick return, easy restoration, and minimal consequences for national sins. The messenger's account destroys these comfortable illusions and demands that the exiles accept their situation as more than temporary displacement. Yet, even in the midst of devastating news, seeds of hope begin to sprout. If God has judged his people as thoroughly as the fugitive describes, perhaps the judgment is now complete. If the punishment has been as severe as prophecy predicted, maybe the time for mercy is approaching. If the destruction has been total, perhaps the rebuilding can now begin. Ezekiel begins to share these tentative hopes with his listeners, but carefully and with proper perspective. The restoration will not be quick or easy. The return will not happen immediately. The rebuilding will require generations of patient work. But it will happen because God's purposes for his people extend beyond judgment to renewal, beyond exile to homecoming, beyond death to resurrection. The sun sets completely as the fugitive finishes his account. Darkness covers the settlement, but it no longer feels like the darkness of ignorance or uncertainty. Now it is the darkness that precedes dawn, the silence that comes before new speech, the emptiness that waits to be filled with something better than what came before. Jerusalem has fallen, but Israel endures. The temple is destroyed, but God remains. The kingdom has ended, but the covenant continues. The news is terrible, but it is not final. In the ashes of the old, seeds of the new wait to sprout when the proper season arrives. Shepherds and restoration. The false shepherds have scattered the flock across distant hills where wolves prowl and storms rage without shelter. But God himself will now take up the shepherd's staff, gathering his sheep from every corner of the earth where they have been driven. No longer will hired hands who care nothing for the flock tend the people of Israel. The owner of the sheep will personally ensure their safety and provision. This divine promise comes after the devastating news from Jerusalem has settled into the hearts of the exiles like sediment in still water. The immediate shock has passed, the initial grief has been expressed, and now the question becomes, what happens next? Has God finished with his people, or does some future await beyond the present darkness? Ezekiel's voice carries new tones as he delivers this message of restoration. Gone is the harsh edge that marked his prophecies of judgment. The fire of condemnation gives way to the warm light of hope. The prophet who once acted out siege and destruction now speaks of gathering and healing. The watchman who warned of approaching enemies now announces the coming of a protector. The indictment against Israel's leaders remains as sharp as ever. These shepherds have fed themselves instead of the flock, eaten the fat sheep and clothed themselves with wool, while the weak went unstrengthened and the sick unhealed. They have ruled with force and harshness, scattering the sheep instead of gathering them, driving them away instead of drawing them close. When shepherds fail in their duty, the sheep suffer the consequences. Israel's people have become prey for wild beasts because no one searched for them when they wandered. They have been scattered across foreign lands because no one cared enough to keep the flock together. They have endured hunger and thirst because no one led them to good pasture and clean water. But this neglect will not continue forever. God declares that he will search for his sheep himself, seeking them out as a shepherd seeks his flock on a day when some have been scattered. He will rescue them from all the places where they have been dispersed on a day of clouds and thick darkness. No distance is too great, no location too remote, no situation too hopeless for the divine shepherd to reach his lost sheep. The promise includes specific details that ground hope in concrete reality. God will bring his people out from among the nations and gather them from foreign countries. He will lead them back to their own land, to the mountains and valleys and streams they remember from childhood stories and ancestral memories. He will feed them in good pasture, where grass grows green and water runs clear. This restoration will not be merely political or geographical, but deeply spiritual. The sheep will lie down in good grazing land and feed in rich pasture on Israel's mountains. The divine shepherd will seek the lost, bring back the scattered, bind up the injured, and strengthen the weak. But he will destroy the fat and strong who have oppressed others, feeding them with justice instead of favoritism. The promise extends beyond mere survival to include transformation of the social order that allowed oppression to flourish. No longer will the strong sheep push aside the weak or muddy the water so others cannot drink. No longer will some feast while others starve, some dominate while others cower. Justice will govern the flock as well as mercy. A new kind of leadership will emerge under divine authority. God will set up one shepherd over his people, a ruler after the heart of David, who will feed them and be their shepherd. This coming leader will not exploit the flock for personal gain, but serve their needs with genuine care. He will know each sheep by name and lead them to places of safety and provision. The covenant relationship between God and his people will be renewed and strengthened. He will be their God and they will be his people. The bond that seemed broken by exile and judgment will be restored and made even stronger than before. Past unfaithfulness will be forgiven, present suffering will be healed, and future hope will be secured. This restoration includes harmony with the natural world that was disrupted by human sin. God will make a covenant of peace with his people, eliminating wild beasts from the land so they can dwell safely in the wilderness and sleep in the woods without fear. He will make them and the places around his hill a blessing, sending showers of rain in their season, so the trees yield their fruit and the earth provides its produce. The agricultural imagery speaks to people whose ancestors were farmers and herders, who understand that prosperity depends on rain and sunshine, good soil and healthy livestock. The promise of abundant harvests and peaceful pastures offers hope to exiles who work other people's fields and tend other people's flocks in a foreign land that often seems hostile to their presence. Economic security accompanies physical safety in this vision of restoration. The people will no longer be prey to the nations around them or subject to the whims of foreign rulers. They will live securely in their own land, working their own fields, enjoying the fruit of their own labor. No one will make them afraid or drive them from their homes again. The shame of exile will be replaced by the honor of restoration. Nations that once mocked Israel's downfall will recognize God's blessing on his returned people. The people who were scattered in disgrace will be gathered with dignity. Those who left in chains will return in celebration. The end of the story will vindicate the middle chapters that seemed so dark and hopeless. But this restoration comes with conditions that prevent repetition of past failures. The people must acknowledge their shepherd and follow his leading. They must care for one another with the same compassion he shows them. They must remember their experience of exile and ensure that the vulnerable among them never again face neglect or oppression. The promise of divine shepherding offers comfort to exiles who feel abandoned and forgotten. They are not lost sheep wandering aimlessly in foreign lands, but temporarily scattered members of a flock that will be regathered. Their current suffering is not permanent punishment, but discipline that leads to restoration. Their exile is not the end of their story, but a chapter in a longer narrative that moves toward homecoming. Ezekiel's audience receives this message with mixed emotions. Hope struggles with despair, faith wrestles with doubt, and longing competes with resignation. Some have adapted so well to exile that the prospect of return seems more threatening than comforting. Others have given up hope so completely that promises of restoration sound like cruel mockery of their current circumstances. But the prophet persists in painting this picture of future blessing because he has seen it in vision as clearly as he saw the earlier judgments. The same divine authority that authenticated his warnings of destruction now validates his promises of renewal. The God who scattered will gather, the judge who punished will restore. The shepherd who allowed the flock to be scattered will personally ensure their safe return to the fold. This message of restoration prepares the way for even greater promises to come. If God will be their shepherd, what other relationships might be renewed? If the land will again yield its produce, what other blessings might return? If the covenant will be restored, what other aspects of their relationship with God might be transformed? The answers to these questions await further revelation. But the foundation has been laid for hope that extends far beyond present circumstances. Valley of Dry Bones. The hand of the Lord carries Ezekiel to a place of desolation that defies imagination. A valley stretches before him, filled not with the sounds of life, but with the silence of death. Bones cover the ground as far as the eye can see, not buried respectfully, but scattered carelessly, bleached white by sun and time, picked clean by scavengers and weather. These are not the remains of a single battle or isolated tragedy. The sheer number suggests something far more comprehensive, an entire nation perhaps, or the remnant of a people whose story ended in catastrophe. The bones lie disconnected from one another, femurs separated from skulls, ribs scattered from spines, hands parted from arms that once embraced loved ones. God leads his prophet among these remains, walking him back and forth through the valley so he can comprehend the full scope of what lies before him. The bones are very dry, desiccated by exposure and age, until they seem more like archaeological curiosities than the remains of people who once laughed and wept, hoped and feared, loved and lost. The question comes with divine directness. Son of man, can these bones live? It seems absurd to even consider. Death this complete appears irreversible. Decay this advanced suggests finality beyond appeal. These bones have been separated from life so long that resurrection seems impossible even for divine power. Yet Ezekiel has learned not to limit God's possibilities by human logic. His answer reflects hard-won wisdom about divine sovereignty. O Lord God, you know. He places the question back in the hands of the one who asked it, acknowledging that what seems impossible to human understanding may be routine for divine power. The command comes to prophesy to the bones, to speak words of life into this valley of death. The absurdity of the task matches its impossibility, addressing skeletal remains as if they could hear, commanding resurrection as if words could reverse the work of years or decades. But Ezekiel has learned obedience through his strange calling, so he opens his mouth and speaks to the scattered remains. The result defies every natural law and reasonable expectation. As the prophet speaks, a noise fills the valley, not the silence of death, but the sound of movement, connection, restoration. Bone comes to bone with clicking precision, femurs finding their proper hip sockets, skulls settling onto spinal columns, ribs forming protective cages around emptiness that will soon be filled. Sinews appear next, wrapping around the reassembled skeletons like rope around ship masts. Then flesh covers the sinews, muscle and fat and skin, transforming architectural frameworks into recognizable human forms. What moments before was scattered debris becomes an army of bodies, lying motionless but complete across the valley floor. Yet something crucial remains missing. These reconstructed forms have all the appearance of life, but none of its essence. They are perfectly formed but perfectly still, anatomically correct but spiritually empty. They look like people but do not breathe like people, resemble the living but remain among the dead. God commands his prophet to prophesy again, this time to the breath itself. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe on these slain that they may live. The Hebrew word for breath is the same word used for wind and spirit, suggesting that what these bodies need is not mere air, but the divine essence that transforms dust into living souls. The breath responds to prophetic command, entering the assembled bodies with life-giving power. Suddenly the valley fills with the sounds of awakening, gasping lungs, beating hearts, stirring limbs. The bodies rise to their feet, not a few survivors, but an exceedingly great army, countless multitudes standing where moments before only scattered bones marked the landscape of death. God explains the vision's meaning with clarity that cuts through any possible misunderstanding. These bones represent the whole house of Israel, the entire covenant people in their current state of exile and despair. They say their bones are dried up, their hope is lost, they are completely cut off from life and future. They see themselves as spiritually dead, nationally finished, relationally severed from the God who once called them his own. But the vision declares that this apparent death is not final. Just as scattered bones can be reassembled into living bodies, so scattered Israel can be regathered into a living nation. Just as dry bones can be clothed with flesh and filled with breath, so hopeless exiles can be restored to life and returned to their land. The God who creates life from nothing can recreate life from what seems like nothing. The promise extends beyond mere political restoration to spiritual renewal. God will open their graves and raise them from their burial places of exile. He will put his spirit within them so they live, not just as a collection of individuals, but as a people animated by divine purpose. He will place them back in their own land, where they will know experientially that the Lord has spoken and acted. This vision addresses the deepest despair of the exiled community. They feel not just displaced, but destroyed, not merely scattered, but spiritually dead. Their national identity has been shattered, their religious practices disrupted, their hope for the future extinguished. They see themselves as finished, their story concluded, their covenant with God terminated. But the Valley of Dry Bones declares that death is not the end of the story. What appears completely hopeless to human eyes remains full of possibility for divine power. The God who spoke the world into existence can speak new life into what seems like non-existence. The Creator who formed the first human from dust can reform his people from the dust of their scattered hopes. The vision also reveals the process of restoration. It does not happen instantly, but in stages. First, the basic structure, bone to bone, then the connecting elements, sinews, then the covering, flesh, and finally the animating principle, breath, spirit. Restoration takes time and involves multiple phases, each building on what came before. The role of prophetic proclamation appears crucial throughout the process. Ezekiel must speak to the bones before they assemble, prophesy to the breath before it enters the bodies. Divine power works through human proclamation. Supernatural restoration comes through natural means of communication. The prophet's words serve as the instrument through which God's power flows into seemingly hopeless situations. Some in Ezekiel's audience may wonder if this vision should be taken literally or symbolically. Will dead Israelites actually be raised from their graves, or does the resurrection imagery point to national renewal? The prophet's explanation suggests the latter. This is about the restoration of Israel as a people, not the resurrection of individual corpses. Yet the vision's power transcends its immediate historical application. It speaks to every situation where hope seems extinguished, life appears finished, and restoration feels impossible. Whether applied to individuals, communities, or nations, the message remains consistent. God can bring life from death, hope from despair, restoration from destruction. The exceedingly great army that emerges from the valley suggests that restoration will not be partial but complete, not grudging but generous, not minimal but abundant. What God rebuilds will be greater than what was destroyed. What he restores will surpass what was lost. The end will justify the means. The restoration will vindicate the exile. The resurrection will explain the death. As Ezekiel concludes his account of this remarkable vision, his listeners sit in stunned silence. The imagery is too powerful to dismiss, too specific to ignore, too hopeful to resist. Perhaps their current deadness is not permanent. Perhaps their scattered condition is not final. Perhaps the God who once chose them has not finished with them after all. In a valley that seemed to hold only death, they glimpsed the possibility of life beyond anything they dared imagine. The two sticks become one. Sometimes the simplest gestures carry the deepest truths. Ezekiel stands before his people holding two ordinary pieces of wood, nothing special about them, just sticks a child might pick up from the ground. Yet in the prophet's weathered hands, they become symbols of a dream that has haunted Israel for centuries. The first stick bears writing for Judah and the Israelites associated with him. The second carries different words for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and all the house of Israel associated with him. Two kingdoms, two peoples, two broken halves of what once was whole. The exiles watch as Ezekiel brings the sticks together. His movements are deliberate, almost ceremonial. When the wood touches, something beautiful happens. They become one stick in his grasp. The crowd murmurs. They understand symbols now. Years of strange prophecies have taught them to look beyond the surface. This is what the Lord says. Ezekiel's voice carries across the settlement. His words flow like a gentle stream, painting pictures of reunion and restoration. The northern kingdom of Israel, scattered like seeds in the wind by Assyria, will return. The southern kingdom of Judah, now broken in Babylon, will heal. Division will end. But this unity runs deeper than politics or geography. The prophet speaks of hearts made new, of spirits cleansed from the inside out. No longer will they chase after foreign gods or bow to carved images. One people, one God, one shepherd to guide them home. The shepherd Ezekiel describes isn't just any leader. This figure carries the ancient name of David, not the historical king who died centuries ago, but something greater, a ruler who embodies David's heart, his passion for justice, his love for God's people. Under this coming king, the scattered tribes will find their way back to each other. The promise extends beyond mere political reunification. Ezekiel describes a fundamental change in human nature itself. Hearts of stone, hardened by suffering and sin, will become hearts of flesh, soft, responsive, alive. God's own spirit will dwell within his people, making obedience natural rather than forced. The land itself will participate in this great restoration. Mountains that once hosted pagan shrines will bloom with righteousness. Valleys that echoed with the cries of injustice will ring with songs of joy. The very soil will cooperate with divine purposes, yielding harvests that speak of heaven's blessing. Old wounds between brothers will heal. Ancient jealousies will fade like morning mist. The rivalry that split Solomon's kingdom apart will become just a painful memory. In its place, a new kind of relationship will flourish, one built on shared identity rather than competing interests. This vision of unity extends even to worship. No longer will there be competing temples or rival priesthoods. One sanctuary will serve as the heart of national life, drawing all tribes together in common reverence. Sacred festivals will unite rather than divide, creating rhythms of celebration that bind the community together. The covenant itself will be renewed, transformed from external law into internal reality. Commands written on stone tablets will become desires written on human hearts. What God requires will align with what his people want, creating harmony where once there was only struggle and rebellion. Ezekiel's audience drinks in these words like desert travelers finding a spring. Years of exile have taught them the bitter taste of division. They've seen how scattered peoples lose their identity, how broken communities forget their purpose. The promise of restoration touches something deep within their souls. Yet, the prophet makes clear that this reunification isn't merely about returning to old patterns. This will be something entirely new, not just Israel and Judah patched back together, but a transformed people living under a new covenant. The past will inform the future without imprisoning it. The two sticks remain joined in Ezekiel's hands as he finishes speaking. A simple object lesson, but one that lodges itself in memory. Years later, when the exiles tell stories to their children, they'll remember the day the prophet showed them how broken things can become whole again. Hope has a way of spreading even in the darkest places. As word of Ezekiel's vision travels through the exile community, something shifts in the collective mood. Perhaps the separation isn't permanent. Perhaps the wounds can heal. Perhaps home is more than just a memory after all. Gog of Magog. In the landscape of Ezekiel's visions, not all paths lead to peace. The prophet now turns his gaze toward a distant threat, a shadow that will one day darken the restored land. The name echoes strangely, Gog from the land of Magog. Who is this mysterious figure? Even Ezekiel seems to peer through veils of time and mystery. Picture a future scene. Israel has returned to her land, rebuilt her cities, restored her flocks and herds. The people dwell in safety, their walls torn down because they no longer fear invasion. Prosperity has returned. Gardens bloom where once lay ruins. Children play in streets that echo with laughter rather than lamentation. Into this peaceful scene comes darkness from the north. Gog gathers his armies, vast coalitions from distant lands with strange names. Meshech and Tubal march under his banner. Persia sends her warriors. Cush and Put join the advance. Even the distant shores contribute their fighters to this great host. The armies flow across the landscape like a cloud covering the earth. Their numbers stagger the imagination. Horses and riders fill the valleys. Weapons gleam like scales on some enormous serpent. The very ground trembles under the weight of their advance. But something unexpected waits for this mighty army. The God of Israel has been watching, preparing, biding his time. This invasion isn't catching him by surprise. He's orchestrated it, drawn these forces together for his own purposes. Gog believes he's acting from his own will, but larger hands guide his steps. The confrontation comes swiftly. As Gog's forces pour into the promised land, heaven responds with fury that shakes creation itself. Earthquakes split the ground beneath the invaders' feet. Mountains crumble, walls collapse. The very foundations of the earth seem to give way. Fire rains from the sky, consuming whole battalions in moments. Hailstones, the size of boulders, crash down upon the advancing armies. Pestilence sweeps through their ranks like wind through wheat. In their confusion, the invaders turn on each other, sword against sword, brother against brother. The slaughter is complete, devastating, final. What took years to assemble vanishes in a single day. The great host that came to plunder Israel becomes food for carrion birds and wild beasts. Their weapons will fuel Israel's fires for 7 years. Their dead will require 7 months to bury. But why does this vision come to Ezekiel now, in the midst of promises about restoration and unity? Perhaps because true peace requires defeat of every enemy, the settling of every threat. The people need to know that their future safety rests not on human strength, but on divine protection. The vision also reveals something profound about God's relationship with history itself. Even the most hostile forces serve his ultimate purposes. Gog comes as an enemy but becomes an instrument of divine self-revelation. Through this great defeat, all nations will recognize the power and sovereignty of Israel's God. There's mystery woven through this prophecy, layers of meaning that seem to extend beyond any single historical moment. Some scholars see references to specific ancient enemies. Others find patterns that repeat throughout history. Still others glimpse shadows of ultimate cosmic conflict between good and evil. The language itself carries an otherworldly quality. Names and places that resist easy identification, descriptions that blend literal and symbolic elements, time frames that seem to stretch beyond normal chronology. It's as if Ezekiel is seeing something that transcends ordinary historical categories. Yet, the core message remains clear and comforting. No enemy, however mighty, can ultimately threaten God's people once he has restored them. No alliance, however vast, can overcome divine protection. No weapon forged by human hands can prevail against the purposes of heaven. The vision of Gog serves as a bookend to Israel's story of redemption. First comes the restoration, the return from exile, the rebuilding of cities, the renewal of covenant relationship. Then comes the final test, the ultimate invasion that proves once and for all where true security lies. For the exiles listening to Ezekiel's words, this distant vision offers present comfort. If God can handle the greatest threat imaginable, surely he can manage their current troubles. If divine power can destroy mighty Gog, certainly it can bring them home from Babylon. The prophet's voice grows quiet as he finishes this strange prophecy. The images linger in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Gog and Magog become names that will echo through centuries, symbols of every force that stands against God's purposes, but symbols also of divine victory, of evil ultimately defeated, of peace finally secured. The new vision begins. 25 years have passed since the walls of Jerusalem crumbled. Ezekiel has grown older, his hair whiter, his face more deeply lined. The young priest who once served in Solomon's temple has become an aged prophet whose words carry the weight of decades. Yet on this particular day, something new stirs in the air around him. The date marks an anniversary, not of destruction, but of hope. It's the beginning of a jubilee year, when debts are forgiven and slaves set free. How fitting that on such a day, God chooses to show his servant something unprecedented, something that will reshape how people think about worship itself. Ezekiel feels the familiar sensation, the hand of the Lord resting upon him. But this time, the experience carries different qualities. Instead of the fierce urgency that marked his earlier visions, there's a sense of careful planning, of architectural precision. He's being invited not just to see, but to measure and record. The vision begins with transportation. Ezekiel finds himself lifted up, carried through space and time, to a place that seems both familiar and completely new. He stands upon a very high mountain, looking down at what appears to be a city. But this isn't the Jerusalem he remembers. Ruined, broken, abandoned. This is something else entirely. A figure approaches him, a man whose appearance gleams like bronze. But this isn't an ordinary person. Light seems to radiate from his presence. In his hands, he carries tools of measurement, a line of flax and a measuring reed. His purpose becomes immediately clear. He's here to show Ezekiel every detail of what lies spread out below them. Son of man, the figure speaks with authority that brooks no argument. Look carefully with your eyes, hear with your ears, and set your heart on all that I shall show you. You were brought here in order that I might show it to you. Declare all that you see to the house of Israel. The words settle into Ezekiel's consciousness like seeds planted in rich soil. This isn't just another vision to comfort the exiles or warn the nations. This is a blueprint, a plan, a detailed schematic for something that will transform how God's people relate to the divine presence. What spreads out before them defies easy description. It's clearly a temple complex, but one that dwarfs anything previously imagined. The structure seems to go on forever, courts within courts, chambers beyond chambers, passages that lead to still more passages. Every surface gleams with perfection. Every angle speaks of divine geometry. The man with the measuring tools begins his work, and Ezekiel follows like a student trailing behind a master craftsman. Each measurement is called out, each dimension carefully noted. Nothing is left to chance or approximation. The vision demands precision, accuracy, careful attention to every detail. As they walk, Ezekiel begins to grasp the sheer scale of what he's witnessing. This temple complex covers an area that could contain entire cities. Its walls rise to heights that seem to touch the sky. Its gates gleam with materials that catch and reflect light in ways that almost hurt to look upon directly. But it's not just the size that staggers the prophet. It's the order, the harmony, the sense that every element has been placed with intentional purpose. Nothing is random or accidental. Every court serves a function. Every chamber fulfills a role. Every passage connects to a larger pattern. The bronze figure moves with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with every corner of this vast complex. He knows where every door leads, what every room contains, how every system interconnects. His measurements are not discoveries, but confirmations. He's recording what already exists perfectly in divine intention. Ezekiel tries to absorb it all, but the sheer volume of information threatens to overwhelm him. Dimensions, materials, decorative elements, wave after wave of detail washes over his consciousness. Yet somehow he knows this is exactly what he needs to see, exactly what his people need to hear. The vision marks a turning point in Ezekiel's prophetic career. For years, his words have carried themes of judgment and destruction. The temple he once served has been reduced to rubble. The priesthood he was trained for has been scattered or killed. Everything connected to worship in his experience speaks of loss and exile. But now something different emerges. This vision promises not just restoration, but transformation, not just repair of what was broken, but creation of something entirely new. The temple he's being shown doesn't just replace Solomon's building. It transcends it, fulfills it, brings it to completion in ways the original never could. As the bronze figure continues his methodical tour, Ezekiel realizes he's witnessing the answer to questions that have haunted the exile community. Where will God dwell when they return? How will worship be restored? What will replace the lost temple? The vision provides answers, but answers that stretch understanding to its limits. The measuring continues, methodical and thorough. Each room, each court, each gate receives the same careful attention. Nothing is skipped or summarized. The bronze figure seems determined to show Ezekiel every inch of this sacred space, to leave no detail unexplored. And Ezekiel knows with growing certainty that he's being prepared for something beyond just observation. He will need to remember all of this, to carry these measurements and descriptions back to his people. The vision is not just for his own enlightenment. It's a commission, a responsibility, a trust placed in his care. Blueprint of the new temple. The bronze figure leads Ezekiel through passages that seem to multiply before their eyes. Each turn reveals new chambers. Each door opens onto fresh courtyards. The temple complex unfolds like a flower blooming in slow motion, layer upon layer of sacred architecture, revealing itself to the amazed prophet. They begin at the outer wall that surrounds the entire complex. The measuring reed in the guide's hand spans 6 cubits, about 10 feet. The wall measures exactly 1 reed thick and 1 reed high, creating a perfect square that defines the sacred space within. Already, Ezekiel notices the emphasis on symmetry, on proportions that speak of divine order. The eastern gate captures their attention first. Here the measurements become intricate, almost musical in their precision. The gateway stretches 50 cubits wide and 25 cubits deep. Within this space, smaller chambers line the passage, 3 on each side, each one precisely 10 cubits square. Windows provide light, but not ordinary windows. These are beveled, crafted to catch and direct illumination in specific ways. Steps lead up to each gate, 7 for the outer court, 8 for the inner court. The numbers aren't random. 7 speaks of completion, of divine rest after creation's work. 8 suggests new beginnings, resurrection, the start of something beyond earthly perfection. Even the steps teach lessons to those who walk upon them. The courts themselves stagger the imagination. The outer court stretches in all directions, paved with stone that gleams like polished marble. 30 chambers line its perimeter, each designed for specific purposes in the temple's operation. The space feels vast enough to hold entire cities, yet intimate enough for individual prayer. But it's the inner court that truly captures Ezekiel's attention. Here, the measurements become even more precise, the decorations more elaborate. Palm trees and cherubim appear carved into every surface, their forms repeated in patterns that seem to dance before the observer's eyes. The imagery speaks of Eden, of paradise restored, of the dwelling place of God made accessible once again. 3 gates provide access to the inner court, east, north, and south. Each mirrors the others in design, yet each carries unique details that reward careful observation. The bronze figure measures every threshold, every post, every decorative element. His attention to detail is absolute, leaving nothing unrecorded. The altar stands at the center of the inner court, but this isn't the bronze altar of Solomon's temple. This structure rises in tiers, each level precisely measured and positioned. Its design echoes ancient ziggurats, those step pyramids that reach toward heaven. Yet here the symbolism is transformed. This mountain of sacrifice points not to human ambition, but to divine grace. Kitchen areas occupy the corners of the inner court, spaces where the priests will prepare the offerings. Even these utilitarian rooms receive careful measurement. The bronze figure shows Ezekiel how the kitchens connect to storage areas, how drainage systems carry away blood and waste, how every aspect of temple function has been planned with meticulous care. The building itself, the sanctuary proper, rises like a mountain at the heart of the complex. Its measurements dwarf those of Solomon's temple, yet its proportions maintain the same essential relationships. The holy place stretches 40 cubits long, 20 wide, and 20 high. The most holy place beyond it forms a perfect cube, 20 cubits in every direction. But here something remarkable becomes apparent. This most holy place isn't separated by a curtain like the old temple. Instead, wooden doors provide access, their surfaces carved with palm trees and cherubim that seem to move in the changing light. The symbolism is profound. No longer is God's presence completely inaccessible. The way into his presence remains restricted, but not sealed. Side chambers surround the sanctuary on 3 sides, stacked in 3 stories. Each story contains 30 rooms, creating 90 chambers in total. These spaces serve the practical needs of temple operation, storage for sacred vessels, preparation areas for priestly duties, spaces for the countless activities that keep a great sanctuary functioning. The roof above the sanctuary carries special significance. Cedar beams support carved decorations that rival any palace. But this isn't mere ornamentation. Every design element speaks of theological truth. The palm trees represent victory and righteousness. The cherubim speak of divine protection and presence. Even the wood itself carries meaning. Cedar resists decay, suggesting the eternal nature of God's dwelling. Water features throughout the complex, though the bronze figure only hints at what's to come. Channels and drains suggest flowing streams, cleansing pools, sources of life that will transform not just the temple, but the entire land around it. The architecture itself anticipates the life-giving properties of divine presence. As they walk, Ezekiel begins to understand that he's seeing more than just building plans. This temple represents a new form of relationship between God and his people. The old temple was destroyed because it became corrupted, turned from its true purpose into a hollow ritual shell. This new structure seems designed to prevent such corruption, built with safeguards that protect its essential spiritual function. The measurements continue with relentless precision. Every post, every threshold, every decorative element receives careful attention. The bronze figure seems determined that nothing be left to chance or approximation. When this vision is reported to the people, they must understand exactly what God intends to create. Priests' chambers occupy specific areas, each designed for particular aspects of their service. Some rooms are for eating the sacred portions, others for storing priestly garments, still others for the various preparations that holy service requires. The architecture itself teaches the priests how to maintain proper distinctions between sacred and common, clean and unclean. The vision of the temple blueprint fills Ezekiel with wonder and confusion in equal measure. This structure seems almost impossibly grand, yet every detail speaks of practical function. It's a place of worship, but also a center of community life. It's a house for God, but also a gathering place for his people. The measurements reveal not just architecture, but theology made visible in stone and wood and precious metal. Sacred rituals restored. Within the measured perfection of the new temple, life stirs with ancient rhythms made new. The bronze figure leads Ezekiel through passages where the sound of worship will one day echo, showing him not just the architecture, but the activities that will fill these sacred spaces. Here, ritual becomes relationship, ceremony transforms into communion. The priesthood itself emerges transformed from the old patterns. Not all of Aaron's descendants will serve in this new sanctuary. Only the sons of Zadok, those who remained faithful when others went astray, will approach the altar and enter the inner court. Their loyalty during dark days has earned them special privileges in the age of restoration. These faithful priests will dress differently than their predecessors. Linen garments replace the elaborate robes of former times, simple, clean, practical clothing that emphasizes purity over pomp. No wool will touch their bodies while serving, for wool causes sweat, and sweat speaks of human effort rather than divine grace. Even their clothing teaches theological lessons. Their hair too carries meaning, not shaved bald like pagan priests, nor flowing long like Nazirite vows, but trimmed with careful moderation. Every aspect of their appearance speaks of balance, of the middle way between extremes. They represent a people who have learned wisdom through suffering, who understand that truth often lies between opposing errors. The rituals themselves blend familiar elements with startling innovations. Daily sacrifices continue, morning and evening offerings that mark the rhythm of sacred time. But the animals offered are unblemished in ways that go beyond mere physical perfection. They represent hearts made pure, lives consecrated completely to divine purposes. The prince, for there will be a prince in this new order, occupies a unique position, not quite a king, not exactly a priest. He serves as the bridge between the sacred and secular realms. He provides the sacrificial animals, sponsors the great festivals, ensures that worship continues without interruption. Yet, he cannot enter the inner court. Even princes must recognize the limits of their authority. Sabbaths in the new temple carry special significance. The prince enters through the east gate, which remains closed on ordinary days, and worships from the threshold while the people gather in the outer court. The ritual emphasizes both his elevated position and his fundamental equality with all who seek God's face. Leadership serves worship rather than replacing it. The great festivals return with renewed meaning. Passover speaks not just of ancient deliverance from Egypt, but of ultimate freedom from all that enslaves the human heart. The Feast of Tabernacles celebrates not just historical wandering in the wilderness, but the journey every soul makes toward its true home in God's presence. New moon celebrations mark the beginning of each month with special sacrifices. Time itself becomes sacred, divided into segments that remind worshippers of divine sovereignty over history. The calendar speaks of God's involvement in human affairs, of meaning that transcends mere succession of days and years. Sin offerings take on particular importance in the restored ritual system. But these aren't merely about individual guilt. They acknowledge the corporate nature of human failure, the way communities share responsibility for justice and injustice. The priest who offers these sacrifices carries the weight of collective consciousness. The bronze figure shows Ezekiel, where priests will eat their portions of the sacrificial meals. These aren't just practical arrangements for feeding temple workers. The shared meals create community among those who serve, binding them together in fellowship that mirrors the divine unity they represent to the people. Cooking facilities receive detailed attention. 4 courtyards in the outer court contain kitchens where the Levites will prepare offerings for the people to eat. The arrangement suggests festival atmosphere, community celebration, shared joy in God's provision. Worship becomes not just individual piety, but corporate celebration. The most sacred offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings must be eaten in holy places within the temple complex itself. The location emphasizes the gravity of sin, the costliness of forgiveness, the privilege of those who mediate between divine holiness and human failure. Geography teaches theology. Cleansing rituals extend beyond mere ceremonial washing. The bronze figure describes purification of the sanctuary itself, annual cleansing that removes the accumulated defilement of human contact with sacred space. Even holy places need ongoing purification in a world touched by imperfection. The restored rituals emphasize teaching as much as sacrifice. Priests must instruct the people in the difference between sacred and common, clean and unclean. Their role extends beyond offering sacrifices to include education, guidance, and moral leadership. They serve as living examples of the holiness they represent. Property laws governing the priests reveal divine concern for their welfare. They receive no inheritance of land like other tribes, but they do receive portions of offerings, designated areas for their dwellings, and protection from economic exploitation. God provides for those who serve him, but through the community rather than through individual wealth. Marriage restrictions for priests ensure the integrity of their service. They cannot marry widows or divorced women. With one exception, they may marry the widow of another priest. The regulations emphasize the importance of their role, the need for their lives to embody the wholeness they represent in worship. The rituals create rhythm, daily offerings that mark morning and evening, weekly Sabbaths that provide rest and reflection, monthly celebrations that divide time into meaningful segments, annual festivals that connect present experience with sacred history. Time itself becomes a temple where God meets his people. Yet, for all their precision, the restored rituals point beyond themselves. They create space for encounter, establish conditions for meeting, provide structure for relationship. The ultimate goal isn't perfect ceremony, but genuine communion, God dwelling among his people finding their home in his presence. As Ezekiel absorbs these details, he realizes he's witnessing the restoration of something that was lost long before the temple's physical destruction. These rituals represent recovered understanding of what worship really means, not human attempts to manipulate divine favor, but divine invitation for human hearts to find their rest in the presence of their Creator. The return of the glory. The bronze figure brings Ezekiel to the eastern gate of the temple complex, the same gate through which the divine presence departed in an earlier vision. But now, something different approaches from the horizon. A sound begins to build, not the silence that marked God's departure, but the rushing noise of many waters, the voice of heaven returning to earth. Light appears in the distance, growing brighter with each passing moment. This isn't ordinary illumination, but something that makes the sun seem dim by comparison. The very air begins to shimmer with approaching radiance. The ground beneath Ezekiel's feet starts to vibrate, responding to the nearness of divine presence. The sound grows louder, like the voice of the Almighty that the prophet heard in his first vision by the Kebar River. But where that initial encounter carried tones of judgment and calling, this return resonates with fulfillment and homecoming. The same voice, the same power, but speaking different words to a transformed situation. Then Ezekiel sees them, the living creatures from his inaugural vision. 4 faces, 4 wings, wheels within wheels, eyes like burning coals scattered throughout their beings. They move in perfect formation, each step coordinated with the others, their motion creating patterns of light that dazzle the observer's vision. Above the creatures, the throne appears, crystalline, transparent, yet somehow more solid than anything earthly. Upon the throne sits the figure like a man, surrounded by fire and rainbow brilliance, wearing glory like a garment woven from pure light. This is the kavod, the weight and substance of divine presence returning to dwell among his people. The procession moves with stately dignity toward the eastern gate. There's no hurry, no urgency, just the measured pace of sovereignty claiming its rightful domain. The living creature's wings beat in rhythm that sounds like worship, like creation itself, singing welcome to its creator's return. As the divine chariot approaches the temple, the gate opens to receive it, not ordinary doors swinging on hinges, but the very architecture responding to the presence it was designed to house. Stone and wood and metal recognize their purpose, fulfilled at last by the arrival of the one for whom they were crafted. The glory fills the eastern gate, floods through the passages, spills into the courtyards. Light penetrates every corner of the temple complex, every chamber and corridor and sacred space. What was empty now overflows. What was void now teems with divine presence. The architecture achieves its intended purpose. But something remarkable happens as the glory settles into the temple. Unlike the mobile throne chariot that departed from Jerusalem, this presence comes to stay. The wheels stop turning. The living creatures fold their wings. The constant motion that characterized the earlier visions gives way to settled dwelling, to God making his home among his people. The voice speaks from within the temple, addressing Ezekiel directly. "Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever." The words carry weight beyond their surface meaning. This isn't temporary visitation, but permanent residence. The promise continues with sobering conditions. No longer will the house of Israel defile this holy place with their idolatry and spiritual adultery. The bones of their kings will not lie near the sacred precincts. Clear separation between holy and common will be maintained, ensuring that divine presence won't be driven away again by human rebellion. Ezekiel falls on his face before the overwhelming glory, just as he did beside the Kebar River years ago. But this time the experience carries different emotional tones, not the terror of first encounter with divine holiness, but the awe of witnessing promise fulfilled, exile ended, relationship restored. The Spirit lifts the prophet to his feet and brings him into the inner court. Here, surrounded by the architecture he has just seen, measured and described, Ezekiel witnesses the glory filling the house completely. Every chamber glows with divine radiance. Every surface reflects celestial light. The temple becomes what it was always meant to be, not just a building, but a dwelling place. This return of the glory answers questions that have haunted the exile community for decades. Where was God when Jerusalem fell? Why did he allow his temple to be destroyed? Had he abandoned his people forever? The vision provides overwhelming response. God's absence was temporary, strategic, redemptive. His return demonstrates that divine love survives even human failure. The glory's return also validates all of Ezekiel's previous prophecies. His strange sign acts, his uncomfortable warnings, his promises of restoration, all are vindicated by this moment. The prophet who seemed mad to his contemporaries is revealed as the messenger of divine truth. His words find their fulfillment in this blazing return. But the vision carries implications beyond mere vindication. This glory doesn't return to the old temple. That structure lies in ruins, never to be rebuilt in its original form. Instead, divine presence inhabits the new sanctuary, the transformed architecture that represents a new covenant, a new relationship, a new way of being God's people. The light that fills the temple isn't harsh or consuming, though it blazes with intensity beyond description. Instead, it seems to invite, to welcome, to embrace. This is the light of homecoming, of love triumphant, of promises kept despite human failure. It transforms everything it touches. The temple courts ring with sound, not human voices, for no people are present in this vision, but the harmony of creation itself responding to its creator's return. Stone and wood seem to sing. Metal rings like bells. Even the air vibrates with joy at the restoration of right relationship between heaven and earth. As Ezekiel witnesses this glorious return, he understands that he's seeing more than just the end of exile. This vision reveals the ultimate destiny of creation itself, the divine presence dwelling permanently among his creatures, transforming everything by the reality of his nearness. Heaven and earth converge in this sacred space. The glory settles into the temple like a king taking his throne after long absence. But this isn't conquest or seizure, it's homecoming, return to a place prepared with love and longing. The temple receives its divine inhabitant as a bride welcomes her bridegroom, as a child embraces a returning parent. Yet even in this moment of ultimate fulfillment, mystery remains. The glory that fills the temple is the same presence that filled the tabernacle in the wilderness, that dwelt between the cherubim in Solomon's temple, that departed so grievously in Ezekiel's earlier vision. But it's also something new, presence not just visiting but dwelling, not just appearing but remaining, not just blessing but transforming. A new land for a new people. With the temple established and divine glory dwelling within its courts, the bronze figure leads Ezekiel to witness something equally remarkable, the redistribution of the promised land itself. But this isn't merely about drawing new boundaries or settling old disputes. This vision reveals divine justice, reshaping geography itself, creating space where every tribe finds its proper home. The land stretches before them, transformed from the chaotic divisions that marked Israel's troubled history. Gone are the irregular boundaries that led to jealousy and conflict. In their place, neat parallel strips run east to west across the territory, each tribe receiving its portion with mathematical precision. Order replaces the disorder that contributed to the nation's downfall. Starting from the north, Dan receives the first allotment. The tribe that wandered farthest from orthodox worship, that struggled most with idolatry, now finds itself closest to the northern border, a position of responsibility that suggests redemption rather than punishment. Even failure can be transformed into faithful service. Asher follows, then Naphtali, each receiving equal portions despite their different histories and circumstances. The ancient promises to Jacob's sons find fulfillment in this new distribution, but fulfillment that emphasizes equity over historical precedent. Past achievements don't determine future inheritance. Divine grace does. Manasseh, Ephraim, and Reuben continue the sequence, their territories measured with the same careful precision that marked the temple's dimensions. The half-tribe of Manasseh receives full status in this redistribution. Divisions that once weakened the nation are healed through the simple act of equal treatment. Then comes the sacred district, a special portion set aside for the temple, the priests, the Levites, and the prince. This central territory doesn't belong to any single tribe, but serves the spiritual needs of all. Its placement in the heart of the land emphasizes that worship stands at the center of national life. The sacred district itself divides into carefully measured sections. The temple occupies the center, surrounded by an area for the sons of Zadok who minister as priests. Their portion ensures they can live near their place of service while maintaining the holiness required for their sacred duties. Adjacent to the priest's territory, the Levites receive their allocation, a portion that acknowledges their role in supporting temple worship, while recognizing they don't hold the same level of sacred responsibility as the priests themselves. The geography teaches lessons about spiritual hierarchy and the different ways people serve divine purposes. The prince receives his portion on both sides of the sacred district, territory that allows him to fulfill his responsibilities to provide for worship while preventing him from accumulating excessive power. His land stretches to both the eastern and western borders, giving him resources, but also obligations that extend across the entire nation. South of the sacred district, the remaining tribes complete the pattern. Judah, the tribe of kingship, receives the portion immediately adjacent to the sacred territory, honoring its royal heritage while integrating it into the larger pattern of equity. No tribe dominates the others, yet each maintains its distinctive identity. Benjamin, once the smallest tribe, receives a full portion equal to all the others. The tribe that produced Israel's first king, that nearly disappeared through civil war, finds itself restored to full status. Divine grace erases the consequences of past disasters, offering fresh starts to those who seemed beyond hope. Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun, and Gad complete the southern sequence. Each name carries memories, some glorious, some painful, all redeemed in this new arrangement. The tribal histories that once divided the nation become simply part of a larger story of restoration and unity. The coastlands receive special attention in this redistribution. Where once Philistine cities threatened Israel's security, now Hebrew settlements extend to the Mediterranean itself. The sea becomes Israel's border rather than a source of foreign invasion. Even geography serves the purposes of divine restoration. Eastern boundaries stretch to the Jordan River and beyond, reclaiming territories that were lost during the dark years of defeat and exile. The river that once marked limitation now flows through the heart of restored Israel. Water that divided becomes water that unifies, carrying life throughout the transformed land. The allocation doesn't depend on tribal size or political influence. Large tribes and small receive equal portions. Powerful clans and humble families share the same inheritance. The redistribution embodies divine justice, not giving people what they deserve based on past performance, but giving them what they need for future flourishing. Foreign residents within the land receive remarkable treatment in this new order. Unlike the conquest period when Canaanites were driven out or destroyed, these foreigners who have chosen to dwell among God's people receive inheritance rights alongside native Israelites. The land opens its arms to all who seek genuine belonging. This inclusion of foreigners reveals something profound about the restored nation's identity. It will be defined not by bloodline alone, but by commitment to divine purposes. Those who choose to cast their lot with God's people become God's people, receiving full benefits of citizenship in the sacred community. The boundaries themselves seem designed to prevent the conflicts that plagued earlier periods. No tribe can claim superior access to water sources, trade routes, or defensive positions. The parallel strips ensure that each territory includes both highlands and lowlands, both fertile valleys and protective hills. Cities of refuge, mentioned in earlier legislation but poorly implemented in the monarchy period, find their proper place in this new arrangement. These sanctuary cities offer protection to those who flee violence or seek justice, creating safety nets that prevent blood feuds from destroying community harmony. The Levitical cities scattered throughout all the tribal territories serve as centers of learning and worship. Their distribution ensures that no area lacks access to religious instruction and spiritual guidance. The Levites become a unifying force, connecting all tribes through shared commitment to divine law. Trade routes crisscross the restored land in patterns that encourage cooperation rather than competition. Merchant paths connect tribal territories, creating economic interdependence that strengthens political unity. Commerce becomes a tool for building relationships rather than exploiting differences. Water rights, always a source of conflict in semi-arid regions, are established with clarity and fairness. Springs, wells, and streams serve the common good rather than enriching only those lucky enough to control them. Even natural resources reflect divine justice in their distribution. The vision of land redistribution offers hope to Ezekiel's original audience, exiles who wondered if they would ever see their homeland again. But it also challenges them to imagine something better than what they lost. This isn't just restoration but transformation, not just return but renewal. Agricultural patterns in the redistributed land emphasize sustainability rather than exploitation. The soil that suffered under foreign occupation will recover its fertility through proper stewardship. Crop rotation, Sabbath years, and Jubilee celebrations ensure that the land remains productive for future generations. Forests and wilderness areas receive protection in this new arrangement. Not every acre becomes farmland or pasture. Wild spaces remain wild, preserving habitats for animals and providing resources for future needs. The vision balances human requirements with environmental wisdom. The transformed geography creates conditions for the fulfilled life that eluded Israel during the monarchy period. With secure boundaries, fair distribution, and divine presence dwelling in their midst, the people can finally experience the rest that was promised to their ancestors but never fully realized. Yet the land redistribution comes with responsibilities as well as privileges. Each tribe must maintain its territory properly, treat foreigners justly, and support the central sanctuary that serves all. Inheritance brings obligation. the obligation to be worthy of divine generosity. As Ezekiel absorbs this vision of geographic justice, he realizes he's witnessing the physical foundation for spiritual renewal. The external arrangements create conditions where internal transformation can flourish. Fair distribution of resources removes many sources of the jealousy and conflict that destroyed the earlier kingdom. The new land arrangement serves justice without destroying mercy, maintains order without crushing individuality, creates unity without erasing diversity. It's a vision of society organized according to divine principles rather than human ambition, a glimpse of what becomes possible when heaven's priorities reshape earthly arrangements. A city with a name. At the southern edge of the redistributed land, something extraordinary takes shape, not just another urban center or administrative capital, but a city that embodies everything the vision has promised. Its very existence speaks of promises kept, relationships restored, divine presence dwelling permanently among human hearts. The city measures 18,000 cubits around its perimeter, a perfect square that reflects the ordered justice of divine rule. But this geometric precision doesn't create coldness or rigidity. Instead, the careful measurements ensure that every resident enjoys equal access to the benefits of urban life. Justice becomes architecture. Fairness transforms into street layout. 12 gates pierce the city walls, 3 on each side, each bearing the name of one of Israel's tribes. The arrangement speaks of inclusion, of every family group finding its proper entrance into the sacred community. No tribe stands excluded from this ultimate gathering place. No name gets forgotten in the final accounting. The gates themselves tell stories of redemption. Reuben's gate stands despite his ancestors' moral failure. Simeon and Levi receive honor despite their violent past. Even Dan, the tribe most associated with idolatry, finds its name inscribed in the city's walls. Divine grace overwrites human history with more generous narratives. Each gate stretches 1,500 cubits wide, creating entries spacious enough for great crowds, yet intimate enough for individual recognition. The architecture suggests both celebration and personal welcome, both community gathering and private homecoming. The city opens its arms to all who seek genuine belonging. Streets within the city follow patterns that encourage encounter while maintaining privacy. Public squares provide spaces for community life, market activities, and civic celebration. Residential areas offer quiet refuges where families can flourish away from urban bustle. The city serves both human sociability and human need for solitude. Water flows through the city in channels that bring life to every district. These aren't just practical waterways for drinking and sanitation, but streams that speak of divine presence flowing through human community. The same river that transforms the temple precincts brings renewal to residential neighborhoods. Gardens and green spaces appear throughout the urban landscape, preventing the city from becoming a sterile concentration of stone and metal. Trees line the streets, parks provide respite from activity, and cultivated areas produce food within the city limits. Urban life maintains connection with natural rhythms and cycles. The city's location speaks of accessibility rather than defensibility. Unlike Jerusalem, perched on hills that made approach difficult, this city sits in open country where roads converge from all directions. It welcomes visitors rather than intimidating them, invites approach rather than discouraging it. Trade and commerce flourish within the city's borders, but under conditions that prevent exploitation of the vulnerable. Market regulations ensure fair weights and honest dealings. Price controls protect the poor from gouging during difficult times. Economic activity serves community well-being rather than individual accumulation. Craftsmen from all the tribes contribute their skills to the city's ongoing development. Metalworkers from Dan, weavers from Asher, stonecutters from Naphtali. Every tribal tradition finds expression in the city's evolving character. Diversity becomes strength rather than source of division. The city needs no temple because the great sanctuary lies nearby in the sacred district. Yet sacred space permeates urban life through smaller venues for prayer and study. Neighborhood centers provide places for instruction, discussion, and spiritual formation. The sacred and secular blend seamlessly. Justice flows through the city's legal system with the same reliability that water flows through its channels. Courts operate with transparency and fairness. Judges serve the law rather than their own interests. Legal proceedings protect the innocent while addressing genuine wrongdoing. Education receives high priority in the city's social organization. Schools in every district ensure that children from all backgrounds receive instruction in both practical skills and spiritual wisdom. Learning becomes a civic value rather than a privilege reserved for the wealthy. The city's governing structure prevents the concentration of power that corrupted earlier kingdoms. Leadership rotates among qualified candidates from different tribes. Decisions require consultation and consensus rather than autocratic decree. Authority serves the community rather than dominating it. Cultural life blooms within the city's boundaries. Music, poetry, storytelling, and visual arts all find encouragement and support. Festivals celebrate both tribal traditions and shared national heritage. The city becomes a center for creative expression that honors divine creativity. Marriage customs within the city strengthen tribal identity while encouraging intertribal relationships. Young people can choose partners from their own tribes to maintain family traditions, or from other tribes to build bridges across ancient divisions. Love serves unity without destroying distinctiveness. Care for the vulnerable receives systematic attention. Widows, orphans, foreigners, and the disabled all find support systems that prevent them from falling into destitution. The city's prosperity includes everyone, rather than benefiting only the successful and fortunate. The aged receive honor within the city's social structure. Their wisdom guides community decisions. Their memories preserve important traditions. Their blessing sanctifies new ventures. Age becomes a resource rather than a burden. Experience becomes treasure rather than obsolescence. But perhaps the most remarkable feature of this extraordinary city isn't its size, its beauty, or even its justice. It's the name that crowns all these other qualities, the title that captures the essence of what makes this place different from every other urban center in human history. The name doesn't honor a human founder or commemorate a military victory. It doesn't reflect geographic features or economic advantages. Instead, it speaks the deepest truth about what transforms any place from mere location into true home. The city's name embodies promise fulfilled, relationship restored, presence permanent. As Ezekiel contemplates this urban vision, he realizes he's seeing the culmination of everything his prophetic ministry has proclaimed. Here stands the answer to exile's despair, the healing of covenant's brokenness, the restoration of the intimate relationship between creator and creation that was paradise's original gift. The city represents not just Israel's future, but humanity's destiny, the place where divine presence and human community achieve perfect harmony. It's both historical promise to a specific people and universal hope for all who long for home in its deepest sense. And the name that captures this reality, that summarizes everything the vision promises, echoes through the prophet's consciousness like a bell, tolling the end of sorrow and the beginning of joy eternal. 4 simple words in Hebrew that change everything they touch, that transform geography into theology, that turn urban planning into spiritual revelation. The Lord is there. Legacy of the prophet. The visions fade, leaving Ezekiel alone beside the Kebar River where his prophetic journey began decades ago. The bronze figure has vanished. The temple measurements echo only in memory. The city, with its sacred name, exists only in the realm of promise. Yet something profound has changed in the old prophet's understanding of his calling and its meaning. Years stretch behind him now, years of strange sign acts that made him appear mad to his neighbors, years of unwelcome prophecies that earned him scorn rather than respect, years of isolation that marked the price of speaking divine truth to resistant ears. The young priest who was torn from temple service has become an aged seer whose words will outlive the exile itself. His message defied every conventional expectation. When his fellow exiles longed for quick return to Jerusalem, Ezekiel proclaimed that the city would fall completely. When they clung to hopes of political restoration through human schemes, he insisted that only divine intervention could heal their wounds. When they sought comfort in familiar patterns, he demanded transformation from the inside out. The early years brought the hardest assignments, acting out Jerusalem's siege while his neighbors watched in bewilderment, lying on his side for over a year to symbolize the duration of punishment, shaving his head and beard to represent coming devastation. Each performance made him appear more eccentric, more divorced from reality as others understood it. Yet, beneath the bizarre exterior lay theological insight that penetrated to the heart of Israel's crisis. Ezekiel understood that the problem wasn't merely political or military, but spiritual. External restoration required internal renewal. Return from geographical exile demanded return from moral exile as well. His vision of individual responsibility challenged inherited assumptions about corporate guilt. While acknowledging that communities share consequences of collective choices, Ezekiel insisted that each person bears responsibility for their own moral decisions. Children don't automatically suffer for parents' sins, nor do parents escape judgment through children's righteousness. The doctrine emerged from pastoral necessity. Exiles used ancestral guilt to excuse their own moral failure, claiming they couldn't help inheriting their father's punishment. Ezekiel stripped away these excuses while offering hope that personal repentance could break cycles of inherited destruction. His understanding of divine holiness exceeded even priestly training. The visions revealed God's absolute otherness, his complete separation from everything common or defiled. Yet this same holiness didn't remain distant, but chose to dwell among people, transforming them through proximity to divine presence. The temple vision synthesized Ezekiel's deepest theological insights. Architecture became theology, measurements revealed divine character, and ritual expressed relationship rather than mere duty. The prophet who began as a priest returned to priestly concerns, but with prophetic depth that transformed everything he touched. His influence on subsequent Jewish thought proved enormous. The Talmudic rabbis struggled with his visions, finding them almost too sacred to discuss openly. His descriptions of divine glory provided vocabulary for mystical speculation that continued for centuries. His temple measurements inspired architectural dreams that persisted long after the Second Temple's completion. Christian interpreters found in Ezekiel's writings rich imagery for understanding Jesus and the Church's mission. The Good Shepherd, the New Heart, the Valley of Dry Bones, all became powerful metaphors for spiritual transformation. The New Jerusalem, described in Revelation, echoes Ezekiel's vision of the city, whose name proclaims divine presence. Yet Ezekiel's immediate audience often missed his message entirely. Fellow exiles dismissed him as an entertainer, whose dramatic performances provided distraction from their troubles, but carried no serious meaning. They enjoyed his creativity while ignoring his content, treating prophecy as performance art rather than divine communication. The prophet's personal costs were enormous. His wife's death became another sign act, her passing, symbolizing the loss of everything dear to the exiled community. He couldn't mourn publicly for the woman he loved because his grief had to serve larger purposes. Even personal tragedy became prophetic ministry. His social isolation deepened as his message proved accurate. When Jerusalem fell exactly as he predicted, his vindication brought no satisfaction. Being right about disaster offers cold comfort when the disaster affects everyone you care about. Prophetic insight often becomes prophetic burden rather than prophetic privilege. The later visions of restoration provided some compensation for years of proclaiming judgment, yet even these hopeful messages carried weight rather than simple joy. Ezekiel understood that restoration required the same divine power that accomplished creation itself. Human effort alone could never achieve the transformation he envisioned. His concept of the new covenant influenced biblical theology for generations. The promise of hearts made flesh rather than stone, of God's Spirit dwelling within human spirits, of law becoming desire rather than external command. These insights shaped Christian understanding of salvation and Jewish hopes for Messianic age. The dry bones vision became perhaps his most famous prophecy, capturing hope that seemed impossible in rational terms. Dead things could live again, scattered pieces could reunite, breath could return to what appeared completely lifeless. The vision spoke to every situation that seemed beyond human remedy. His portrayal of divine jealousy, God's passionate commitment to exclusive relationship with his people, challenged both casual religious attitudes and theological abstractions. This wasn't philosophical deity removed from emotional involvement, but personal God whose love demanded complete reciprocation. The watchman theme that appeared repeatedly in his prophecies defined prophetic responsibility for every generation. Those who see danger coming bear obligation to warn others, regardless of whether the warning receives welcome. Silence in the face of approaching disaster makes the silent partly responsible for resulting damage. His influence extended beyond religious circles into literature, art, and popular culture. The imagery of wheels within wheels, living creatures with multiple faces, and valleys filled with bones, captured imaginations across cultures and centuries. Ezekiel's visions provided vocabulary for expressing the mysterious and transcendent. Yet perhaps his greatest legacy lies in demonstrating that divine calling survives human failure. The people he served rejected his message. His nation went into exile, his temple was destroyed, his priestly career ended before it properly began. By conventional measures, his ministry failed completely. But conventional measures missed the deeper reality. Ezekiel's words outlasted the empire that destroyed Jerusalem. His visions provided hope that sustained exiled communities through centuries of displacement. His understanding of divine character influenced theological development long after the historical circumstances that shaped his message had passed into memory. The strange, difficult prophet, whose contemporaries thought him mad, proved to be the sanest voice of his generation. His refusal to offer false comfort, his insistence on individual responsibility, his vision of restoration through divine power rather than human effort, all demonstrated clearer perception of reality than his critics possessed. The End and the Echoes. The scroll of Ezekiel's prophecies closes with visions of glory restored, land redistributed, and divine presence dwelling permanently among transformed people. Yet the story doesn't end with the prophet's final words. Like ripples spreading from a stone dropped in still water, his message continues expanding across centuries, touching lives and shaping understanding in ways the original audience could never have imagined. The immediate impact proved limited and frustrating. Fellow exiles treated Ezekiel more as entertainer than prophet, enjoying his dramatic presentations while ignoring their serious content. They gathered to watch his sign acts, discussed his symbolic performances, but remained fundamentally unchanged by encounters with divine truth. The prophet became a curiosity rather than a catalyst for transformation. When Jerusalem's fall vindicated his warnings, the response shifted from dismissal to grudging respect. Suddenly, the eccentric performer appeared prophetically gifted. His earlier predictions gained credibility that opened ears to his later promises of restoration. Vindication brought influence, though influence purchased at the price of national catastrophe. The returning exiles carried Ezekiel's visions back to the promised land, but their attempts at implementation fell short of the glorious blueprints. The Second Temple, built after the exile's end, followed traditional patterns rather than Ezekiel's innovative designs. The restored community struggled with the gap between prophetic vision and practical possibility. Yet failure to achieve literal fulfillment didn't diminish the vision's power. Instead, they became standards by which every restoration attempt was measured, goals toward which each generation could aspire, hopes that sustained faith through continued disappointments. The very impossibility of complete fulfillment testified to their divine origin. Rabbinical interpreters found Ezekiel's writings both fascinating and troubling. His temple measurements differed from traditional accounts. His ritual descriptions challenged established practices. His visions of divine glory pushed language to its limits. Some teachers restricted study of these texts to mature scholars who could handle their mysteries responsibly. The mystical traditions that emerged in later Judaism drew heavily on Ezekiel's imagery. The Merkabah mysticism focused on the throne chariot visions, seeking direct encounter with divine presence through meditation and spiritual discipline. The prophets' descriptions provided roadmaps for mystical journeys that promised immediate divine encounter. Christian interpreters discovered rich resources in Ezekiel's prophecies. The Good Shepherd became Jesus gathering scattered sheep. The New Covenant found fulfillment in hearts changed by divine grace. The Valley of Dry Bones pictured resurrection hope that conquered death itself. Every major Christian doctrine found support in Ezekiel's writings. The Book of Revelation, Christianity's final biblical text, echoes Ezekiel repeatedly. The living creatures around the throne, the measuring of the temple, the city that bears God's name, the river flowing from the sanctuary, all reflect Ezekiel's influence on apocalyptic imagination. The prophet's visions provided vocabulary for describing ultimate reality. Medieval artists found inspiration in Ezekiel's surreal imagery. Illuminated manuscripts portrayed the four living creatures with creative interpretation that sometimes departed dramatically from the text's descriptions. Cathedral sculptures incorporated the prophet's symbols into stone testimonies of faith. His visions became visual as well as verbal. The Protestant Reformation rediscovered Ezekiel's emphasis on individual responsibility and direct divine encounter. Reformers used his teachings to challenge systems that claimed to mediate between God and believers. The prophet's insistence that each person must personally respond to divine calling supported arguments for individual faith rather than institutional authority. Modern psychology has found in Ezekiel's experiences material for understanding altered states of consciousness, visionary encounters, and the relationship between religious experience and mental health. Some interpreters view his visions as products of psychological trauma from exile and cultural displacement. Others defend their genuinely divine origin while acknowledging their psychological dimensions. Literary critics recognize Ezekiel's contribution to symbolic expression and imaginative writing. His ability to create memorable images, to blend realistic detail with fantastic elements, to use symbolic actions that carry multiple layers of meaning, all demonstrate sophisticated literary skill that influences writers across cultures and centuries. Contemporary environmental movements find resources in Ezekiel's vision of renewed land and flowing rivers, his portrayal of creation restored, of water bringing life to desert places, of trees bearing fruit beside healing streams. These images speak to ecological concerns and hopes for environmental restoration. The State of Israel's establishment in 1948 prompted renewed interest in Ezekiel's prophecies. Some interpreters saw literal fulfillment of ancient promises in modern political developments. The dry bones coming to life seem to describe Jewish return to their ancestral homeland after centuries of exile and persecution, culminating in Holocaust survival and national restoration. Yet other readers insisted that Ezekiel's ultimate fulfillment lies beyond any earthly political arrangement. The temple he described remains unbuilt. The perfect justice he envisioned remains unrealized. The complete transformation he promised awaits future divine intervention that will exceed every human attempt at restoration. The tension between already accomplished and not yet completed fulfillment characterizes much contemporary engagement with Ezekiel's prophecies. Believers find in his words both comfort for present difficulties and hope for future resolution. The visions provide both explanation for current circumstances and anticipation of coming transformation. Popular culture continues drawing on Ezekiel's imagery. Science fiction writers borrow his descriptions of strange creatures and otherworldly encounters. Musicians set his words to contemporary melodies. Artists create visual interpretations of his visions using modern media and techniques. The ancient prophet speaks to contemporary imagination. Academic scholarship approaches Ezekiel with tools of historical criticism, literary analysis, and comparative religion. Scholars debate the composition history of his book, the relationship between his visions and ancient Near Eastern mythology, the development of his theological concepts. Yet, academic study, however valuable, sometimes misses the spiritual power that originally motivated the writings. The deepest echoes of Ezekiel's ministry resound in human hearts that recognize their need for transformation. His message that change must come from within, that divine power can accomplish what human effort cannot achieve, that individual response matters regardless of community failure, these insights speak to universal human experience. Perhaps Ezekiel's greatest modern relevance lies in his demonstration that hope survives even when circumstances seem hopeless. The prophet who witnessed his nation's destruction, his temples burning, his people's exile, nevertheless proclaimed ultimate restoration. His faith that divine love conquers human failure offers courage to every generation facing overwhelming challenges. The strange, difficult prophet, whose contemporaries thought him mad, continues, speaking to a world that often seems as broken as ancient Jerusalem. His visions of wheels within wheels may puzzle modern readers, but his core message remains clear. Divine presence can transform any situation. Divine power can resurrect any death. Divine love can heal any wound. The echoes continue spreading, carrying forward a message that began beside the Kebar River but has never reached its final destination. Somewhere in the future that only God can see clearly, Ezekiel's visions await their complete fulfillment when the city with the sacred name becomes reality and all creation discovers what it means to live where the Lord is truly present.